A little bit quiet because we have to have Tom hear us over everyone else talking.
Hey folks, can you all quiet down so we can do our meeting? We have people on the phone and we need to be able to hear them. Thank you.
Okay, so first, Andrea, I know you had a statement, or we. Very good, thank you. The board has a statement to read, and I would defer to Andrea as our spokesperson on this one.
Last week, vandalism at Greystone Fields was discovered involving the spray painting of anti-Semitic symbols and racial language. Sadly, this is not the first time that Westford has experienced such vandalism. Perhaps the perpetrators of this act do not appreciate the impact these symbols and words have. Regardless, such words and symbols reflect expressions of hate that have no place in Westford. The Select Board condemns such acts of hatred in the strongest of terms and remains committed to fostering and supporting our values of diversity, inclusion, respect, and tolerance. We thank the Recreation Department for their prompt response in removing the graffiti, and we ask that anyone who may have any information about this act to contact the Westford Police Department, who continue to investigate. The Westford Police Department may be contacted at 978-692-2161 or the anonymous tip line at 978-399-2072. Thank you.
We can't
Thank
hear
you.
you. I mean, you're not amplified.
Well, we'll have to talk louder, I guess, then. The mics don't project, the mics are for recording purposes. And one of the other item of business for the Select Board is a consent agenda, and Tom is remote tonight, so we need to do a roll call vote. So first is a special license for Cancer Awareness Fundraiser. Applicant is Michael Riley. It's September 1st, 2023, 6 to 10 p.m. at 11 Summer Village Road. And secondly, a street closure request for a church picnic. Applicant is David Walsh. September 10th, 2023, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at 10 Church Street. Is there a motion to approve, subject to public safety comments?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, Tom?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Andrea?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Aye. We're done, Mr. Chair, for...
Thank you. I think we need to wait till 7. Thank you.
Watch the recording of the July meeting. Which I'll officially acknowledge it.
All right, everybody, good evening. I'd like to call to order this planning board meeting for Monday, August 21st. I'd like to welcome the select board. I'd like to welcome the Board of Health. I'd like to welcome Chief Chambers. I'd like to welcome Town Council and everybody in the audience. This is a planning board meeting. We'll begin with our initial open forum, which I'll remind everyone that's planning board information, not anything to do with the new zoning gun bylaw, but just general open forum, and then we'll discuss moving forward with the joint meeting. This is a 4-member board. Bob is here, but he is here remotely, so all votes will be taken by roll call. And I'll begin with the board. Anybody on planning board have anything for open forum?
Nope.
No.
Bob?
No, I do not.
Mr. Morissette?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a public service announcement. On September 7th, there will be the Strategic Planning Retreat at Kimball Farm. That's from 5 p.m. to 8 o'clock p.m. There's going to be 2 different topics covered. The first is sort of an update about the budget task force and the progress they've made to date, and to answer any questions you folks may have. And the second is about the MBTA communities, the multifamily housing requirement. So we hope you folks can attend. We do ask that you try to register on the town's website in advance, just so we can better plan for that event, make sure we have all the logistics covered. So again, that's September 7th, and we hope to see many of you folks there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Genowitz? And I neglected to welcome town staff. Thank you, too. Okay, so now we're done with open forum. I would like to invite, I think Select Board has already opened their meeting. If Planning Board would like to open their meeting, sorry, Board of Health, call that meeting to order.
Roll call in, or?
All right. What I'd like to do is ask the various boards if they would like to raise any questions or comments, answer any questions that they may have. If we have the answer, again, we have town council here to help us out. After that, we're certainly welcome to go to the audience. We'll set some guidelines prior to that. We'd like new information only, understanding that not everybody has attended every meeting and they may not know what new information is. We'll certainly answer any questions that anybody has to the best of our ability. We would like to limit this to about 3 minutes per speaker. We'd ask folks that have attended the other meetings to maybe hold off and let folks ask questions that haven't asked questions before. But before we get to that, I think maybe a quick overview of why we were here. As most of you know, there is right now no regulation of gun licenses in town beyond of same regulations that, say, a convenience store may have. We've had zoning since 1955. Right now, there is 1 license in town that is not active. What the Select Board and the Planning Board have jointly sponsored a zoning amendment, which would take 2/3 majority at town meeting to pass, to attempt to put some regulations for gun shops or gun licenses in town. The chief had requested a distance of 500 feet, or just a distance between the licenses to help solve problems that had happened in other communities. We've gone from there, and I'll ask Mr. Morissette to maybe give us a little bit more detailed overview of where we're at. We've gone from there to maybe a limitation of licenses, and also where those licenses may be granted. So, Jeff, if you want to give a little overview of where we're at now and how we got there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of housekeeping items first. So first, Planning Board member Darren Wiest, who was absent during the July 17th Planning Board public hearing. He did watch the materials, and he did sign the requisite Mullen form, so he's available to be seated tonight. Also, as you mentioned, with us tonight is Justin Parada, counsel from KP Law. And of course, we have Chief Chambers here, and we have Joe Genowitz working behind the scenes over there as well, your town planner. Second, I want folks to know we've had a lot of public correspondence. We did send our packet out on Friday at close of business. We did receive a lot of additional correspondence after those packets were prepared and were uploaded to the town's website. A second supplemental packet was prepared today, this afternoon, that contained correspondence from the public that we received from the preparation of the first packet until approximately 1 p.m. today. And additionally, and that is also uploaded to the document management system. It is available for viewing. Subsequent to the preparation of that packet, we also received 3 pieces of correspondence this afternoon. One was from Mr. Barry Rosenberg. It was some follow-up correspondence about his telephone survey he conducted. He expressed that he would like the planning board to modify the draft bylaw to more closely match public opinion. We had correspondence from Beverly Whitney Abeg. She expressed her opinion that she's opposed to firearm sales in general, and that one business was already approved, and that there is less need for guns today than there were centuries ago. And lastly, from Mr. Bill McDonald, a school committee member, he advocates for limiting the total number of special permits to just 2. And so a limited number of the correspondence is at your stations. And so just for a little background, as of April 25th, 2023, the Select Board agreed to jointly sponsor a zoning bylaw amendment with the Planning Board to regulate firearm businesses in Westford. The Planning Board opened that public hearing process on June 5th, 2023. It was continued to July 17th and was continued again to tonight's meeting. The Board of Health also requested to participate in tonight's discussion, and the Select Board was provided with an update on the Planning Board's progress at their meeting of August 15th, and they also requested as co-sponsors of the zoning bylaw amendment to attend and participate in tonight's meeting as well. And so a quick recap of the current proposal that's before you folks. So first, this amendment would define firearm businesses such that they could be treated separately from, say, retail or light manufacturing uses. It would require a special permit from the Planning Board, who would be designated as the special permit granting authority. They would be limited to a total of 4 special permits, and they would be limited to just 2 zoning districts, the commercial highway and the industrial highway zoning districts. There would be a 500-foot buffer between firearm businesses. There would also be buffers of 500 feet between the firearm businesses and childcare facilities, schools, religious uses, and locations where children under the age of 18 commonly congregate in scheduled structured activities. The police department would also be actively involved as part of this amendment, which is not necessarily the case with the status quo. And since the start of the public hearing, there were only a few changes made that were in response to comments raised by town council upon their review of that draft language. And just as a reminder about our current zoning bylaw that Mr. Bonifant mentioned earlier, our current zoning bylaw doesn't treat firearm businesses any differently than, say, retail or light manufacturing, depending on the character of the business. Firearm businesses are currently allowed as of right, meaning that the Planning Board lacks the authority to say no and to impose certain conditions of approval. There's currently no limit to the number of firearm businesses in town, and there's currently no setbacks in place from either firearm businesses or to any of the aforementioned uses. Under our current bylaw, firearm businesses that are considered predominantly retail can currently go in 4 different zoning districts. If they're determined to be light manufacturing, they can go in 5 different zoning districts. And if they're determined to be light manufacturing with not more than 4 employees, they could go into 2 different zoning districts. And then lastly, Mr. Chair, just for some background, we've been getting asked a lot of times recently, where did the number of special permits come from? So in January of 2023, we went to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF. We looked at their data available as of the beginning of this year. We looked at the total number of licenses in Massachusetts for selling firearms, for selling ammunition, and for performing gunsmithing services. We took the total number of those licenses issued for Massachusetts communities, divided by the number of communities, and approximated the average at 3.67 licenses or businesses per community. So that was just the starting point to come up with some basis for providing a number. And that's all I have at this time, Mr. Chair. We're happy to try to answer questions as you folks move forward with your conversations.
I just do have, Mr. Morissette, has there been any movement on the Acton bylaw?
So we did reach out to the town of Acton. We did speak with a representative from their planning department today. As it turns out, the Attorney General's office is seeking an extension to provide their legal review. The deadline was today. I guess they had 2 questions that they want some additional information before they provide their response. And so the first relates to the subleasing of space to other firearm businesses. And the other was, I believe they were looking for more information about how they determined their number of special permits, which was at 2. So we don't have anything in writing about the nature. This is all based on a verbal conversation with their planning staff. And so we look to get more information in the future.
Terrific, thank you. I'd now like to have the select board turn it over to you folks with questions, comments, thoughts.
So I'll just go first quickly. So one thing is Tom lost the connection, so he is watching on WCAT until we can get him reconnected. So he will be informed, but he may not be talking. And secondly, I guess it's a question perhaps for council, but perhaps through you. As I look at the commentary, there seems to be an assumption that a establishment means a gun store, and yet that's not the case. There could be repair, could be a range, it could be a store. And the concern, though, around the commentary seems to be the number of stores, and yet guns, like any other mechanical device, need to have repair. So the question I had, I guess, for whomever is it an option within the bylaw to say we will have 4 establishments, of which only 2 can be retail stores?
Sure, I mean, you could set it up that way, you'd have to define things a little bit differently. We looked at some other models and did it that way, where a firearm business had certain sub-definitions, as you've pointed out. You could define each one of those 3 things differently, a gunsmith, a range, and a retail gun store, and set special permit limits as to each one of those 3 things. It would take some rejiggering of the format of the way the draft is set up.
Thanks. Just curious if there was a way out.
Good question, and I think that we did, someone discussed that, was concerned of defining it all, right? And I don't think it's impossible. I think it's certainly, definitely possible.
Any other board, select board comments, questions?
Yeah. I noticed that you now include the Westford Gun Club and the Stony Brook Club as a firearms business. They're a nonprofit. What led you to that decision to include them? And if you do, are they subject to the permitting process if they make any changes? Or if they change their, do something about the use of firearms, or they expand, for example?
So that's a great question, and I think I'll turn to advise the town council. It was his suggestion that we add them in there, and then he can explain on the
Sure.
permit.
So my understanding is that those 2 clubs have been around from before the time of zoning was enacted. I think you said 55 earlier. That would make them what's called pre-existing non-conforming uses, meaning they can continue as an allowed use, assuming they were allowed prior to the time of zoning. The initial draft, the definition was broad enough where a new gun club could potentially come in and be outside the scope of the definitions. So a new nonprofit gun range could open in town and would be outside the special permit provisions as drafted. As that didn't seem to be the intent and didn't seem what the board had in mind, it was redrafted to include those businesses in the definition, or those types of businesses. Because the 2 that are in town are pre-existing non-conforming uses, they'd be protected under what's called Chapter 48, Section 6, as well as the provision of the bylaw that allows those uses to continue. If those businesses, assuming again that they are pre-existing non-conforming, and I think we're pretty comfortable that they are, wanted, as you mentioned, to expand or do something differently, that gets into sort of this complex analysis of whether or not the change would trigger a need for a change of use special permit or an expansion of use special permit to a pre-existing non-conforming use, which is a whole nother sort of type of special permit, so it gets a little bit confusing. But if one has a pre-existing non-conforming use and they want to expand or alter that, they may need a special permit in order to do that, and the standard is whether or not it would be more detrimental to the neighborhood. Before you get to that point, there's a question as to whether or not the change actually would be an extension, and courts are sort of all over the place on that. Typically, a expansion that's within the natural growth, is the term courts use, of a pre-existing non-conforming use, would not need a special permit. And it would be up to initially the building inspector to make that decision, and then potentially the special permit granting authority. If it's an alteration, meaning I have a pre-existing non-conforming use, but I want to do something slightly different, it's more likely to require a special permit. So I think here, because the three types of uses, assuming it stayed that way, would be separately defined, if one of those gun clubs wanted to, for example, start gunsmithing or selling guns, even though they're pre-existing non-conforming, they would need a special permit from the Special Permit Granting Authority to do that. Again, the standard would be whether or not it's more detrimental to the neighborhood.
Well, since they're nonprofits, would they have to change to doing business or working for a profit to engage that permitting problem?
Not from a zoning perspective. I'm not sure from a licensing perspective whether they would probably need a separate license too. So the licensing regime is totally different, you know, that's governed by state law. But they certainly would need whatever license they would need to start doing that. But from a zoning perspective, they wouldn't necessarily need to change sort of the structure of the business in order to at least attempt to add one of those new elements.
And I just have one more question. So if they did that, then they would count against whatever number that we agree to, whether it's 2 or 4 or whatever the town meeting agrees to.
Yeah, no, so there's a carve-out for them. So, and again, unfortunately in Massachusetts in zoning law, we use the term special permit for two different things. So if one of those, at least the way it's drafted now, and it doesn't have to be drafted that way, but the way it's drafted now, if one of those clubs did seek a special permit to expand or to add another element, those would not count against the number of special permits that would be granted potentially for a new use. So because we wanted to avoid any confusion there, we drafted a particular carve-out. Again, that's just the way it's drafted now. There's no reason under the law it has to be that way. That's purely, you know, a policy decision.
Thank you.
I think for the benefit, oh, go ahead, Jeff.
And just, can you clarify that if one of the clubs wanted to expand, that special permit process would be with the zoning board of appeals, not the planning board?
They're the section 6, right? It's different in town. I think here in Westford, they're the section 6.
Correct.
The zone, yeah, so because it's a section 6 special permit, it would be before the zoning board as to whether or not they could expand or alter the pre-existing non-conforming laws.
Thank you.
And I think for the benefit of the audience, we somewhat did go through this exercise and felt that, you know, if one of the clubs came in and wanted to add another firing range or you know, expand the ranges that they have, that wouldn't be an issue. However, if they decided to sell ammunition, then they would have to come before us and start with the special permit process.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Good.
I'm good for now.
We're done.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. Board of Health.
So, before we begin, to be clear, the paperwork said we needed to roll call in. Do we not need to?
I believe you do need to, no, you don't, right? So is all your members here?
They are all here.
Then you don't need to roll
Okay.
call.
All right. So, to start, I just wanted to address the fact that some people have asked me, what does the Board of Health have to do with gun shop issues? And I spoke at one of the previous meetings and explained that the American Public Health Association states that gun violence is a major public health problem and a leading cause of premature death. The CDC has demonstrated that since 2020, guns were the leading cause of death among children and teens in the United States. That data continues that trend. It's overall a leading cause of premature death in this country. And so, you know, for these and many more reasons I could go on, it is a public health issue. The number of gun shops that we have in town is relevant to the health department and the Board of Health. So I'd like to just start with that. I have a question to begin with on the clubs that we're grandfathering in. Is there no way that they can count in the count? Why do they not count towards that 4? Can they not be rolled in with a special permit?
Well, I'll let staff answer, but I think my feeling is that they're pre-existing in their firing ranges. I think this came about looking for folks looking to sell, modify, and sell guns and sell ammunition.
But you have gun ranges in the definition.
We added them in at the advice of town council. Yeah.
So I'm just like clarification.
Yeah, no, so the definition of gun, they were always included. What we added was the, to make clear that the existing clubs would not be included in that count. So as I said before, there's no reason why they couldn't be. That's just the way the current draft was. It would make the process a little cumbersome. It would add an extra layer of determination as to what businesses or nonprofits were potentially pre-existing non-conforming. I think we're pretty comfortable it's just those two, but it resulted in sort of a cleaner, for lack of a better term, analysis, leaving those out, since the intent was to allow them to continue anyway. I think initially there was some confusion about whether or not they had to be explicitly excluded from the proposed bylaw in order to be protected. They don't, again, assuming they're pre-existing non-conforming.
So they could be, I mean, we do this with tobacco and things like that.
Sure,
When
they
we change
could
our
count,
bylaws,
yeah.
we grandfather in the existing businesses with their permits.
Right, I mean, there's, from a legal perspective, this could be drafted anyway, and those could count against the 4 or not.
And the one that is currently open and outstanding could also be grandfathered, and part of that count.
Could be, yep.
Okay. And then the other,
Well, let me just back up. I don't know if you're talking about the 2 clubs. The 2 clubs wouldn't be. If there's another business, I think there was a business in town that got a site plan review approval before this
Right.
process started.
Correct.
That business got approval before this process started. But whether or not they'd be pre-existing non-conforming and entitled to the same kind of protection as the gun ranges, the nonprofit gun ranges, would be a question that, I hate to say this, but really hasn't been addressed by any court, whether or not that site plan review in hand gives you the same kind of protection that, example, a building permit would. So I can't answer that question whether or not they'd be protected or not. It's sort of a question that would have to be answered at some future point.
but
if it
they
rose to
could
that.
be included in the total, if we were saying a total of 4, they could be included in that.
The one that's been approved with site plan review could be included, yes.
But now you're saying not the 2,
No, I'm saying anyone could. I'm
Anyone
saying it's a
could.
policy perspective. I just want
Yeah.
to make clear that the 2,
they're separate situations.
they're separate situations
Correct.
that would have a totally different legal analysis as to what they could or couldn't do. 2 existed before there was any zoning at all in town. 1 came along well later and got a site plan approval, but not a building permit, which is what leaves it a little confusing. So sort of 2 totally separate situations from like a legal analysis.
Okay, thank you. I've heard a lot of questions also about the 500-foot setback, and just wanted to throw out that tobacco setbacks are 500 feet, marijuana shops are 500 feet. I cannot see a reason that we would not at least have a 500-foot setback from schools and such of 500 feet, because that is completely in line with and consistent with the other setbacks that are relevant to schools and childcare places. And I'll let any other board members have questions at the moment.
I have a few questions. You said there's 1 license that's not active?
So somebody came before us and was granted site plan review to opening up a gun store, or what exactly was it? It wasn't a gun store. I think it was, yeah.
Legal Arms Company at 359 Littleton Road.
When was that?
It was specifically a change in use, site
Got
plan
it.
review is what it was.
And so, yeah, that was.
And the underlying zoning supported what, both light manufacturing as well as retail sales to the general public. So
Correct, yep.
this is something, and at the time, Mike, I'll just step in,
Please,
because I
no,
was chairing at the
definitely,
time.
yep.
You know, this is some folks in the audience are gonna not like that I say this, but this is the equivalent of like a place that is today structured to provide learning services, like after-school learning services to kids, and somebody comes in and wants to turn that into a hair salon. They're like, okay, this is a different use. We want to change the use for this location. When it comes before us, that's essentially a rubber stamp. It's like, yeah, I mean, unless there's a significant concern that's raised by one of the town departments, generally those things, if it's approved by the underlying zoning, we tend to approve those.
Okay. All right. And you said something about you're hearing about problems in other communities. What kind of problems are you hearing?
So there was an issue in Littleton where there was a mill building, and so for some of these licenses, if you wanted to, as a hobby, make a gun, if you wanted to manufacture parts, you can't do it in your home, right? You need to do it in a business. And so the mill in Littleton was renting basically little cubicles, and there was an article in the newspaper, there were 80 gun licenses in a small place in Littleton, which I don't want to speak for the chief, but I think prompted him to request the separation between the licenses, which is where we derived that part of the amendment.
Okay, and just one more question. Jeff, when you talked about dividing, how you came up with that number, 3.67, can you just repeat again how you came up with it? You took every community
We
in
took-
the entire state of Massachusetts? You didn't differentiate between where these communities were?
Correct. We just simply took the total number of all those 3 types of licenses, selling firearms, selling ammunition, and gunsmithing, took the total number and just divided by the number of communities, and it just came up with that
So
approximate.
you didn't differentiate where these communities were?
No, we did not.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Joanne?
Could, maybe, I don't know if this is for council, but could we go over again? So we have the existing gun ranges, and that's fine, they've been here forever, I get it. If they change, and they now decide that they want to sell firearms, they have to then come back to, it would be zoning at that point. Are you saying that because they're pre-existing, non-compliant, non-conforming, that that number wouldn't affect the 4? So if we go with 4, and the gun club says, now I want to sell, we already have 2, we have, say, we put the gun club in there, and we have 2 more businesses, so we hit our 4, but now they want to sell, it doesn't count towards that number.
The way it's drafted
what
right
you're
now,
saying?
that's correct. The way it's drafted, I mean, that's not a legal proposition. The way that this draft is drafted, that situation, that would not be included.
Does the zoning board then have the right to say no?
Yeah, so the standard on a section 6 special permit is more detrimental to the neighborhood. So the zoning board, and they do this all the time for all sorts of different expansions and changes of pre-existing non-conforming uses, and there's tons of case law on that, unlike the issue I was talking about before, and there's a standard as to whether or not the ZBA would determine whether or not it was substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. If the ZBA determined that it would be, then it could deny the section 6 special permit.
And what kind of proof, what kind of documentation, how do you show that it's more detrimental to the neighborhood or not?
So if you're the applicant, you certainly want to show that it's not, right? So generally, you'd have people from the neighborhood. I mean, I can't speak for the lawyer who, in essence, would be doing it, but or the applicant. But yeah, you may have people from the neighborhood speak. You may point to similar businesses in similar neighborhoods. If you're in frankly, I'm not exactly sure where these are, but if you're smack dab in the middle of a residential neighborhood, that's going to be different. Okay, well, then that's going to be a different analysis from in a commercial neighborhood. There's all sorts of creative arguments you can make one way or the other, and a party who opposes it could make creative arguments the other way.
Okay.
But the ZBA has a fair amount of discretion on that determination in that scenario. Again, not just for firearms, for any time the ZBA determines whether something's more detrimental to the neighborhood.
And there isn't any way to prevent that because they're pre-existing non-conforming?
That's correct. There's no way to prevent that. That scenario could count against the 4 if the proposed draft were drafted that way.
Okay.
But there's no way to prevent pre-existing non-conforming use from having that right to seek an expansion or alteration.
Okay. I just want to make sure it's very clear that the potential is then for, and I'm not making any dispersion, for these gun clubs to then expand into those types of businesses, those types of uses, thank you.
Legal term.
That the 4 would otherwise corral, if you would. So our 4 could become 6 or 8.
In theory, yes, mathematically, the board in determining the other kind of special permit, right? This is where it gets confusing, not the expanding special permit, I'm coming in for the first time special permit.
Right.
Would have the ability to look at what's available in town and what isn't. And if in that scenario, that may be a factor the planning board looked at to approve or deny a new special permit. But in theory, yes, it could be a total of 6 if those 2 clubs decided to expand.
Okay. But there is an option that you could write that into this document.
Sure, you could draft it so that the 4, any special permit granted under section 6 for an expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming use would be included under the 4.
Okay. May I ask then the planning board, has that been considered?
Yeah, we've discussed this throughout the public hearings.
that's where I'm leaning.
Michelle or Megan?
I have a question. This is probably best directed toward the select board. Is it possible to put this as a ballot item on town election as opposed to special town meeting? Because historically, I think a lot more people vote in town elections than attend special town meetings.
I would actually mean, I don't, we don't want to get in having every bylaw on a ballot. Now, I defer to town council as to what we could or could not do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a zoning change, so it has to be by town meeting, by 2/3 vote at town meeting. I'm not exactly sure what your charter allows for other types of things, but the zoning change itself would need town meeting approval.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else?
I just had a question about the map of where you're allowed to build. So I think you presented an updated map to the select board, and it's only in what's in green. It's this one. Is
Yep.
that right?
Joe, I'm gonna ask Joe if he can find that map and show it. While,
So my question is just, I mean, looking at the scale and stuff, it doesn't look like that much space. Has anyone actually figured out how many it's physically possible to fit in there with the 500, with the separation required?
so earlier on in the process, before we redefined or added some additional language to describe where children commonly congregate, we did perform a cursory exercise of estimating how many potential establishments could happen within the commercial highway, industrial highway zoning districts, factoring in 500-foot buffers from those various uses. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought mathematically it could be possible, was it somewhere between 8 to 12?
Around a dozen.
And that was before taking into consideration the childcare?
No, that
was with that in there?
That was looking at childcare facilities, school, which would at this moment be Neshoba Tech.
Yeah.
Locations where children commonly congregate. There could be a few other locations now because some of the locations where children commonly congregate came out, several of them came out because it was more one-on-one tutoring.
Right.
And those were sort of excluded later on because it wasn't really congregating in groups. So a little more areas open, so it could be a little more than 12 now, for sure.
Okay.
And again, that's all subject to, market availability. There could be at
Well,
least,
yeah.
So we do think it would be double digits, though.
Okay, and then the request was that there be a buffer. It wasn't for 500, specifically 500 feet from the police department, right?
If I may speak, the police chief requested a buffer between one firearm business to another. I don't think he actually ever specified an exact
So we
foot
could make it
difference.
bigger, that's all. And it
No,
would be,
I had just asked for a buffer that would be consistent with existing bylaws.
okay. Those were my questions.
I have one other, which was that in the bylaw as written, you have it that the planning board could approve others at your discretion.
Correct.
Can that not be changed to a town meeting vote?
Anything can be changed. This is just a discussion.
Okay.
So we felt that if there were, somebody came before us and there was a need that was not met, and we've exceeded the limits of licenses, that we could grant an additional license to that person to fill that need.
May I follow up? How would you define need? Do we need an ammo store?
So obviously it's,
Or
that's.
if we don't have one?
Well, if somebody comes before us and say there is no gunsmith in town to repair guns or work on, maybe their business is an antique repair, that would require a license from us. And if the board felt, is it 2/3 majority, I believe, of the board, Jeff?
I believe, yes, the supermajority, 2/3.
Yeah. that the need, there was a need and the need hadn't been met, then the board could issue that license.
I guess that's kind of a very ambiguous,
I'm sorry?
it's a very ambiguous setup in terms of need. So if someone says, I need it to be in Westford because I don't want to drive to Foxborough, is that really a need? I mean, do
Well, I mean,
do
that's
we
your
have
opinion.
to fulfill the need?
Right?
I guess-
That's your opinion. If there was
Yeah.
folks that have guns and want them repaired and don't want to drive to Foxborough, it might be their opinion that they could be able to get it fixed in town.
But this is why I think that needs to be a town opinion and not the opinion
Planning
of
board.
four.
Okay. So to add an additional license, you're saying that it should go before town meeting?
Yes.
I think the thought was, and again, it doesn't have to be this way, was if all the special permits got filled up with one particular limited, and this goes back to the fact that they're all defined together. So if they all get used up, so to speak, by retail, so, for example, that would mean if I wanted to open a gunsmith in town, I wouldn't be able to do it. And there was concern about that being challenged. And so this would add some discretion to add an extra one to add a service that wasn't being provided by one of the others.
Do we do that for other types of businesses and industry? We have quite a few banks. We have quite a few that do.
We don't limit any other businesses or
We
industry.
limit tobacco and alcohol, or not alcohol, select board limits alcohol. We limit tobacco, we limit marijuana
Sales?
shops. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're open to giving, you need special permit to sell tobacco?
Yes.
You do?
Oh, yes.
All right, that's news to me.
And it's limited and it's grandfathered so that if someone goes out, it goes out.
Yeah. Okay.
So we drop that number every time a business closes.
So there's no need to sell more tobacco.
Yeah, one thing I would just say, and just sitting over all this, is tobacco and alcohol aren't protected by the United States Constitution, and these uses are. And so that needs to factor into the analysis.
How can you explain the right to bear arms, perhaps, but
The right to
Right to
sell.
sell.
Yeah, case law says that that's included under the Second Amendment. The right to train with firearms and the right to sell firearms, or be able to, not sell, be able to purchase, are included by case law under the ambit of.
Yeah, but we're
But if-
talking about selling, we're talking about retail sales.
Yeah, so
That's not protected.
well, no, but
The right to own is, absolutely.
yeah, no, and again, I'm just telling you what the case law says. This isn't my, the case law talks about the ability to acquire and train with firearms. If one can't sell firearms in a particular area, then I can't, the potential purchaser can't buy them in that area. So that sort of overlaps. The analysis wouldn't be by the, necessarily by the proposed seller. It would be an analysis of how that affects the rights of people under those uses, again, that have been determined to be protected. And again, I'm sure we'll get into this, but this is like a totally new area of law that's been changed drastically in the last couple of years by this Supreme Court.
Yeah, I just had one more thing,
Yeah.
which was, in the previous meetings, you talked a lot about historicity and wanting to pay attention to the historic nature of Westford in regards to this, and we're able to point to ever having had one gun shop in town. 4? 4 in addition to a current permit and 2 other businesses? I just don't
think
see the historic
I
relevance
think
of
you're
that.
misunderstanding my point. My point is that right now the market is open and there could be 80 gun licenses. in
Yeah,
town.
I know, I see that
Right.
point, and I
But there's
perfectly
none.
respect that point.
There's one out there that's not open. So that's what I'm talking
And I would
about.
say you don't respect the point, because this is the third time you've brought that up, and we've answered that question the same
No,
way.
no.
We're not saying that we would like to have 4 gun shops in town. What we're saying is, historical precedent would dictate that in normal market conditions, the market to support gun shops in Westward is 0. There are none.
Right.
And there have been none. What we're trying to do is put a limit or a theoretical cap. We're not saying we're looking to fill 4 licenses. We're looking to put controls in place for the first time. So you're not really respecting the opinion of what this board has said on multiple occasions, which is what happened in Littleton was an abnormal selling environment. There were 5 or 6 people who were gunsmiths who were surrounded by an ecosystem of 80 hobbyists who are using federal firearms licenses to get access to weapons that are regulated by state law otherwise, right? So, in what Chief Chambers, when he came before us for the first time, really wanted was 2 specific things in this bylaw. 1, the setbacks to other firearms businesses, but 2, the security plan. And what I think all three of the boards tonight that will be hearing a lot of correspondence from the audience need to keep in mind is we need to get this through town meeting in October so that we have those protections in place that the chief is telling us keeps everybody in this room actually much more safe than the number of gun stores that we have in this town.
No, I appreciate that. I absolutely appreciate that. What I was referring to is that you said in the 1970s there was one gun shop in town. So that is our, if we look at
Theoretical
historically,
max, right?
theoretical max. And my concern is, from a public health perspective, there's a lot of concern. If we look at 4, I see that. But I really feel strongly that we need to include the current businesses, the outstanding permit in that number of 4. Because we're still then way beyond our historic number there. Well, not way beyond. If we're including the gun ranges, we're not way beyond. But we are still beyond what Westford has historically had.
Well, that's not true. You said in the 70s there was one, and I believe the gun clubs have been there since.
Right, so that's 3.
So right
So we're
now,
adding
we are
1.
not, we are historically where we were.
Historically, we're at 3. We would be adding 1 if we go to 4, including those.
Including those.
Mr. Chair, I mean, we don't actually know that because the state law on gunsmithing has changed. So you could have had a gunsmith in their own home in 1975, we had no difference. So
That's a great point.
storage, you're correct.
Okay, Board of Health, anything else?
I think that's it for now.
Oop.
Oh, sorry.
I think the point with trying to make sure that we have something in place is valid. But I would respectfully like a different response in that we're all trying to work towards that. I don't think that was quite fair. We should try to put before town meeting the best draft possible and listening to what the residents are saying.
Agreed.
Great. I'll now go to our board. I'll start with Darren. Anything you want to add?
Nothing new.
Concerns?
Nothing new at this point.
Dylan?
I actually agreed with Selectman Hazelton's comment on perhaps clarifying the number of licenses because, and I said this at the end of the last meeting comments, I have 2 thoughts on that. One, I think having 2 of the licenses be reserved for sales and the other 2 for any other firearm business as defined in section 6661 would make sense, right? So gunsmithing and firing ranges would be available to the other 2 licenses. The other thought I had is we could, if this addresses the pre-existing non-conforming, just eliminate firing ranges because there was some comments in some of our previous meetings about whether or not those are more outdoor recreational use anyway. So perhaps if the number is reduced to 2 or 3 and the firing ranges comes out, it addresses the pre-existing non-conforming as well as taking that off the list of things that need to be regulated through this bylaw. Those are my only comments.
Joni?
No, nothing to add.
Bob?
Okay, first, I think one thing for me that was an interesting discussion just now was relative to the gun ranges. And I guess I would be very open to see if we could amend the language so that we allow the uses that currently exist. But I guess gunsmith, it sounds to me like gunsmithing, gun sales, gun modification would be a new use for those ranges. And I would like to see if maybe we could include those kinds of new uses for grandfathered locations as falling under the jurisdiction of the numbers. So with that said, the one thing I haven't heard discussed tonight were any of the papers that were provided to us in tonight's packet, and I wanted to go quickly through those because unfortunately I was not able to find anything that really addressed limiting gun shops in the manner we're talking about here, because that is my statistical numbers. So in the first article, gun violence is a public health crisis. It's very good in there. It talks about common sense gun policies for gun shops, criminal background checks, restricting purchase access, for felons, mentally ill, and the others that are prohibited from purchasing firearms. And if I'm not mistaken, all of these are currently handled by the practices that the state enforces, as well as the federal government, and those that are enforced with Chief Chambers and the Westford Police. So there really was not an argument there for doing anything beyond what the state of Massachusetts and our Westford Police are currently doing that we've been hearing about for the past few months as we've discussed this bylaw. In the second paper, Gun Shops and Neighborhood Violent Crime, the author outright states that they focused solely on urban areas. And unfortunately, their hypothesis and their data did nothing to address rural or suburban areas, which Westford would be classified as. In the third paper, the impact of licensed federal firearm suppliers on firearm-related mortality. I guess I was very I think it was a peer-reviewed article. The title takes you one way, but the actual analysis in there dealt with the density of firearm licenses and the impact of this kind of violence, and did not come at it from firearm supply. So unfortunately, the paper didn't meet what intending to provide us data on, and that would have been a very good paper if it had addressed what they set out to do and looking at firearm supply and its impact in these areas of concern. The fourth paper, which was Public Guns, Private Violence, and the Association of City-Level Firearm Availability and Intimate Partner Homicide, unfortunately, that paper also just used urban areas and practices and metrics that really addressed urban issues and didn't get to the rural and suburban that we need for that analysis. And lastly, the same thing happened with the fifth paper for firearm dealers and local gun violence. It focused on the urban city of Atlanta, and most of the analysis was hard to, as a stretch, to apply to the community of Westford. So kind of summarizing here, there were some interesting and valid points that came out of these articles, not necessarily with respect to limiting gun shops, but in terms of certain restrictions. One was to pay attention to what was permitted in the window display for those stores, and I think we have been discussing this and looking at what the maximum legal extent we can go to limit those displays. And secondly, it did talk about consideration needs to be given for communities that are close to state borders, and that is something that Westford is. We are very close to the border with New Hampshire, and we just simply have to ensure that Westford, the state of Massachusetts, the state of New Hampshire don't create loopholes, and that we look at closing those. Unfortunately, this point doesn't really get to address what we're trying to address here, and that is how many gun shops should we permit, and how should we regulate the gun shops beyond what we've already discussed. So that's really my remarks for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Anything else from the planning board? Okay, again, folks, we'd like to open this up. Oop.
Just want to clarify one thing. So the version that did go to town council had firing ranges in the definition. The question that was posed to town council is, should firing ranges be removed from that definition? And while that is certainly possible, what that might mean is that they could be construed as commercial recreation. And thank you, voters of town meeting, who greatly expanded the opportunity for commercial recreation in town, made the right decision. But that could mean there could be a lot of potential indoor firing ranges that could go anywhere commercial recreation could. So that's something that if that comes out, we just need to figure out how to deal with that, if we should deal with that, and then is that something that we can still do in the scope of this hearing or down the road?
Well, there's a couple issues, and I think in your question or your comment, you were sort of assuming that those existing non-conforming ranges continue. If there's a scenario, let's say, where they don't, and firing range is not encapsulated somewhere in whatever is proposed and maybe passes as an amendment. Two things could happen that would be totally opposite. One is, as Jeff's saying, someone could be convinced that they fall under some other use, in which case sort of the firearm-specific regulations of this draft wouldn't apply to them. Or someone, and I say a judge probably if it went to a judge, could be convinced that they don't fall into any other allowed use, in which case they'd be disallowed altogether in town. If they're disallowed altogether in town, that circles back to some of the constitutional questions about to what extent a municipality can use zoning to regulate these uses. So by including them in the definition, you're sort of avoiding both those scenarios. You're getting a situation where they're potentially allowed but controlled, as opposed to allowed without any control or not allowed at all.
Got it.
Great, thank you. Okay, before again we go to the audience, again I would like to request that new information only. I would hope that we can keep the comments brief. This is a full meeting and we do have other stuff to get to, but you certainly, your opinions and your questions are very important. We have one microphone apparently, so please come up, state your name and your address, and here we go.
Hi, my name is Andy Malio, 23 Pierce Ave. I want Westford zoning bylaws to allow for no more than 2 firearms businesses in town, and that those businesses are at least 750 feet away from one another. That buffer is consistent with other zoning we have for adult-themed businesses that can be no closer than 750 feet apart. That seems consistent. I also want to produce a zoning bylaw that can be passed at town meeting so that we can get this done and we are not here year after year debating this. Businesses and landlords will know what the rules are in Westford and they can plan accordingly. Certainty is good for business. The Select Board and the Planning Board know this issue in depth, and I'd like their joint recommendation for the final wording of this bylaw change to be published in the handouts at town meeting. And I'd like the Select Board and Planning Board to stand together to explain to voters why they want this change in the bylaws to be approved. For the many, many people who have not been working on this issue, it will give them confidence to vote along with the Select Board and the Planning Board's joint recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Diane Wood, 122 Depot. Clarification regarding, I hear constantly this sense of urgency. Oh my gosh, we have to do this now. We have to pass this now because of Littleton, because of the surrounding communities. We were initially told that once we opened public meeting, that would change the dynamics and limit or put on notice any future applications that come through. I just would like, and everyone would like, better understanding of what that exactly means. So on one hand, I hear we have to get it right now, we have to do this right now for special town meeting, we have to finalize. Not a scare tactic, but that's the way I'm interpreting it. On the other hand, we're told, well, once you open the public meeting, other businesses were put on notice. So we're somewhat protected from enabling in the short term. I'd like to understand the risk, and I think the whole community would like to understand exactly what that means and understand the risk, because I don't know why, with all this new confusion now, we're rushing toward any of this. As you can see from some of the questions and the audience turnout, communication is really weak on all this, and for those of us who've been attending every meeting, reading the documents, I'm thoroughly confused right now. So I think communication is weak overall. I know it's a very complicated topic, and I acknowledge that and appreciate everybody's work. But the fact is, it's complicated, and we're rushing, and I'd like to understand why we're rushing. Thank you.
Okay, so I believe we've answered this several times, but we do have counsel here, so we'll hear it right from town council where we stand.
Well, I think I understand the question. The publication of the potential zoning change makes it so that a use that would fall under the change, assuming it was passed at town meeting, the change would apply to any entity that began its use prior to approval at town meeting. Part of the issue here is because there really is no regulation, the town, the first time the town would do anything would be potentially a building permit or maybe site plan review, as in the other situation. But yes, once the notice is published, any use or any business that chose to attempt to operate in the meantime before it's passed at town meeting potentially would be subject to whatever was passed. They certainly could do so at their own risk now and hope that it didn't pass. But once it's published, that eliminates the pre-existing non-conforming protections that we were talking about before. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. So does that mean that if someone applied for a firearm business now, they're still subject under the current bylaw, but if the bylaw amendment passes, they would be subject to zoning enforcement and be made to come into compliance?
Correct. Right, and again, it's, sort of would depend on the scenario, how one wanted to begin a business now. Would they need a building permit? Would they need site plan approval, which are the only two things that every business needs, or if a change of use, as was discussed before. Yes, they would be subject to enforcement in the sense that they could then go apply for the special permit, right? If they fell under the definition as it may be passed at town meeting. They wouldn't necessarily have to start from scratch. But if they didn't obtain the special permit or didn't go to seek it, then yes, they'd be subject to enforcement to have that use stopped.
And so if we decide to take this off this current town meeting and save it for the next one and publish that we'd be looking to do this in the spring, I mean, would that still
There'd be a
put the board?
window, yeah, I mean, then there'd be a window where the notice would sort of expire, and then you'd have the potential for someone to begin prior to the notice, in which case they would be pre-existing non-conforming. Again, it's hard to say exactly what they might need without knowing the specifics of how they wanted to start a business like this. But yeah, that's sort of the issue that would happen if this whole process started again.
Andrew?
I guess I'm a bit confused about what you just said. If we were to, as we've been doing, continue the public hearing, into January or February.
Oh, I see. So the third option would be just to continue this?
Right, and then it wouldn't start the clock all over again, would
Not
it?
unless you needed to do another public notice, if you didn't need to do another public notice, but you'd have to, did the notice reference, I can't recall if the notice referenced the October town meeting.
I believe it did reference the October town meeting. The other issue is, I think, the initial public hearing notice is only good for a certain time period.
Oh,
Right, so
Is
the.
it 6 months, I think?
okay.
about that?
Yeah, so, right, so the notice, right, so the hearing it could, but, the notice itself would expire.
So the notice expires, we have to renotice.
You'd have to
and-
renotice, which sort of would be by definition starting from scratch.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a quick question. So, scenario, if we put forth this amendment, a business comes in, wants to open a gun shop to sell, and this amendment fails at town meeting, whether it be in the fall or in the spring, now that's just
It's
a
the same,
regular
it's just,
situation.
it's the same situation that exists now.
But with the existing business that's already out there, who already has a special permit.
No has site plan approval.
Site plan
I know this
approval.
stuff gets confusing, all the different
Yes,
things,
yes,
yeah.
site plan
And may not even need that. That was triggered by a change of use.
Okay,
In theory, there's a scenario where someone opens a new business like this and doesn't need anything.
could just come in and open this new
Totally has
business
a right.
without
I mean,
anything.
would need state licenses, but again, this is all just from a zoning perspective.
Right.
But from a zoning perspective, could do it without any approval at all.
Okay, thank you.
And I want to dovetail on that. If this article is defeated in October town meeting, we wouldn't be able to bring this back for 2 years, or is there an exception to that where it could be brought back more quickly than that?
Is there 2 years?
I thought there was I thought it's 2 years and there was an exception if it's brought back by the planning board with approval?
As I sit right here, I know there is a provision, I'd have to check on that. I can't recall exactly how that works, but yes, there is an
So
exception.
we might not have to wait 2 years, but it's complicated, is what I'm hearing.
So,
Yeah, as I sit here right now, I don't want to answer it and be
Okay,
wrong,
fair
so.
I believe that a similar zoning amendment
cannot come back sooner than 2 years unless the second time around, the planning board gives favorable recommendation.
Okay.
So it is possible, but you have to get at least a majority of the planning board to make favorable recommendations.
Just to start again, right?
Okay.
Not recommendations
Okay.
on the ultimate
Yeah.
substance,
Yeah.
just recommend, recommend to start the process. Great.
That's what happened with drive-throughs.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Wood, does that answer your question?
The overall message is it's very confusing. We all know it's complicated. We're looking at running 90 miles an hour for.
Okay, if you're gonna, you need to get back to
Okay, I'll
it.
end, sorry, I'll end. Thank you.
Paul Fosswetter, 14 Texas Road. So I got the message, if we want to have the protection that we talked about, 500 feet to separate the dealers to avoid the situation in Littleton, it has to be now. One of the messages in the packet sort of caught my attention. It sort of suggested that once a town has a firearms bylaw, it has something in writing that potential applicants can look at and might make it more attractive as a place to go for a firearms business, because there's less uncertainty as to how they would approach it. And I'm thinking back to other bylaws I've worked on. Usually toward the end of the process, we go through a hunt for loopholes that we've left, unforeseen circumstances and so forth. And so over the last week, I took a quick look. You have a note that talks about size matters and so forth. One comment was, it looked to me like perhaps the size restrictions of the bylaw might not have applied, and I think Jeff set me straight after seeing the note that the 60,000 square foot limitation for retail probably would apply. And the question I have is that appropriate for firearms businesses? I mean, would you want a 60,000 foot retail store, displaying guns? And I haven't done a whole lot of research. I hope you guys have. Just quickly on the internet, I found a place in Florida that advertises that they have 6,000 square feet just of retail display space. There's another one that says they're on 34 acres or something like that, but they have 1,000 guns on display and 10,000 in the warehouse and so forth on the premises. So in this business, it is potentially possible for something huge to come in if we don't do something about it. So one question is, if we start looking at restrictions, for example, for retail sales or something like that, can we set a reasonable size limit on that to keep a monster from showing up? And here again, this is less important probably than the 500-foot thing we need for October. And I guess a question is, do we need a second step for this, or do we want to try and work through all these other potential long-term issues at some later date? Because a bylaw shouldn't just solve our problems today, it should solve our problems next year, in 5 years, and in 10 years. And I think there is so much controversy about some of the things on this bylaw that we may have to put a few things off to the side for a while. The second note I wrote was about changing the voting from the SPGA to town meeting, which was brought up by the health department. There again, I have some experience with some of the past bylaws. The sign bylaw is a perfect example. When we started on that, the select board was the permit granting authority for signs in town. Every single sign had to be handled by them. As we went through the process, the bylaw was changed to make it the planning board and so forth. And when Cornerstone went in, that consumed the planning board's time, as I'm sure some of us remember. And we made another step to have signs approved by the building commissioner. And I think it makes sense to start, in this case, with having any numbers changed be done at town meeting, because at this point, we don't have enough consensus to really say the board has good guidelines from the residents to make a decision or not. And we can always work toward that at some time in the future. So I really would like to see that change put in.
Thank you.
I should probably raise the question I gave it for council, but it's not Florida. I can't imagine a 6,000 square foot gun store here, but how would you handle it at Cabela's, Security Trading Post, Best shops where there's a gun display within a larger general merchandise store? How would that apply under this bylaw?
Well, so if they're doing one of the three things, they would be considered a firearm business.
So all the entire store square foot would count, right?
Yes.
Thanks.
Kathy Lynch on Rush Road. This situation all sounds very complicated. I'd like to simplify it. I used to think we should get rid of all guns. No one should have them, they kill people. Then I matured and learned about the intent of the Second Amendment. Guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens are meant for hunting, sport, and most importantly, self-defense. Criminals ignore laws and find ways to get their hands on guns and other weapons. Think of a big, strong criminal who enters your house to rob, rape, or kill you, or any woman, child, elder, or disabled in your home. How will you defend yourself or the lives of your loved ones? Avoiding dangerous situations is a priority, but trained gun owners can protect themselves when all else fails. Now, recall governments who killed tens of millions of their own citizens. Nazi Germany, China, Taiwan, Soviet Union, Japan, and far too many more. Why would anyone be so foolish as to give away their only means of protecting themselves, even in America? It's not the gun that's the issue. Criminals can find many ways to kill. It's evil intent that is the issue. Law-abiding gun owners know that every attempt by government, including this Board of Health, Planning Board, Select Board, to restrict gun ownership and free enterprise attacks our God-given right to protect and support ourselves. The pro-2A community has conceded enough. No more. While we use our First Amendment right of free speech to petition our government, it is your duty to protect our rights as citizens and business owners. I'll make the situation unambiguous. A well-regulated militia, that is we the people, not the National Guard, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, period.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Megan O'Connell, 44 South Chelmsford Road. Been a resident of Westford.
Yeah.
The microphones don't work. They're for the TV, so if you could just project your voice.
My name's Megan O'Connell. I live at 44 South Chelmsford Road. I've been a resident of Westford for 5 years.
No.
Do you want me to turn around, or?
Why don't you stand over here?
Where should I go?
Right there's fine.
Okay.
You're fine. Just keep that. You're fine. We can hear you.
Megan.
We can hear you.
Thank you. My name's Megan O'Connell. I live on 44 South Chelmsford Road. I've been a Westford resident for about 5 years. I hold a Mass license to carry for about the last 7 years. For the last 2 years, I've held a federal firearms license, Type 3, which, just for clarification, does not give me the right to sell, but I do hold an FFL. What I'm here to talk about today is to acknowledge that there's a lot of high emotions on both sides. You know, Westford has a history of gun violence, especially in 2010, and there's no way to discount that or make light of it. They're horrible, absolutely. But the state has already done things since then to try to address that. In 2018, they implemented the red flag laws, specifically to address things like that. Now, they haven't really been taken advantage of yet, but the tool is there. The other thing that I'd like to say is that, you know, I'm a member of a minority that day after day, my right to live and exist is being challenged and restricted in states across this country. Thankfully not yet here in Massachusetts, but it is. And so when I see and hear my right to defend myself being restricted, it touches a raw nerve. I also look around here, and I know that the demographics of this town, we're about 77% white, about 18% Asian. I have 2 Asian children myself. But I look around this room. Does this represent the town? Or does this just represent your fears? That's what I see. I see all of this as a reaction to fear. I've heard members of the board talk about, we need to do something. Everyone needs to do something. It's not true. I don't want to do something. So don't pretend you speak for me. Speak for yourself, fine. Don't make it sound like every resident wants to do something. What I would support a 500-foot buffer between stores. That seems somewhat reasonable. What I'd also like to support is the school board being on here, implementing gun safety classes for the high school. Let's teach the next generation that guns are not this scary thing. It's the person that's scary. The person that holds it is scary. But what I would urge everyone is to look around the room. Look at all the faces in here. Then look at any of the schools that we have and the kids in there and ask yourself, does this room actually represent and reflect the whole nature of the town? I don't think it does. And that's the basis of racism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Galvin. I live at 90 Concord Road. You have a very important job to do. Let's start off by saying gun violence is an evil. Everybody, I agree with that. I think everybody else agrees with it. All right. The question is, how do you approach it? And if you're going to approach it, you have to do it rationally. All right. It's very important to think about it and do it rationally. 2 considerations with regards to this. If you have a situation in which you're dealing with a constitutional right, and you're also dealing with a perception of safety and a perception of danger, which are very, very explosive and dynamic situations. You have to be able to make it thread that particular issue very carefully. Now, the first thing you have to remember is that, first of all, you're not going to eliminate guns. All right, guns are going to be here. They're going to be here with us forever. The only thing we can do is to be able to control them and to try to de-escalate the society in such a way that people don't resort to them. All right. So now what happens is you're left with two fundamental issues. Number one is if you overstep this, you're going to wind up having two things can happen. You're going to wind up having a court challenge, which is going to cost the town a lot of money, but that's not really the big thing. If it gets too irrational in the way that the laws are passed, what eventually will happen is the public, because we are in a democracy, will override your authority and take matters into their own hands. They will buy these weapons and firearms illegally. Just look at what happened in Chicago and in Atlanta. These are very well-regulated states that have extreme laws on firearms ownerships. But look at the street violence and the gun violence. What's happened is the authority has been eradicated because it's been discredited. People don't believe it. And that's the last thing you want to have happen. Now, specifically on this bylaw, and I will leave, is I think there's no disagreement with regard to the location and the zoning. I think that's pretty much, from my sense of talking to people, everybody's pretty much in agreement that the commercial highway zone that's a pretty good idea. So I don't think there's an issue with that. Okay? The issue will be the numbers. That's going to be something to be discussed about. But I want to talk about the special permit authority because I think that's something we need to really consider. The problem with the special permit authority is, or the concerns over it is, the planning board is primarily involved with development and regulating development. So bottom line is, the special permit from the planning board's perspective, it generally involves regulating development. We're talking about potential upstanding businesses here. We're talking about people moving into already existing site plan, reviewed, approved areas of discussion, of operation. That's a different thing. Traditionally, that has been done by the Zoning Board of Appeals. But it's also very important to understand that the police chief has a significant amount of authority in how these places will conduct themselves and run. I heard some concerns today about what this would involve. The chief under Chapter 140, Section 123, basically can regulate the people who want to do this, and he can set and establish conditions. And the concerns about lighting, all right, that's already in the law now. The context map, you can require that by site plan review, which is a reasonable request, a reasonable thing to do. Ownership description, already required by state law. He has to know who everybody is. Signage plan, God knows, we had a long debate over signs, all right? I'm sure there's a few people wincing about those. That's a very strong bylaw and has a lot of control for the town. The display issue, the concern about displays, having weapons in cases, illegal in Massachusetts, can't do it by state law.
Please wrap it up, Mr. Scott.
Okay, so all I wanted to say is that please use your reason on this. Don't try to duplicate state law, and watch out how far you go, because you don't want to wind up in court. We want something that works. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jay McEwen. I live at 4 Morrison Lane. I wanted to start out by saying that I appreciate the Select Board, Planning Board, and the Board of Health meeting in one place tonight. Can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure. Okay. Thank you for listening to the citizens of Westford and allowing us to speak and voice our concerns. I could go over gun violence statistics, suicide rates, mental health, and guns, murder rates by guns, but I won't, as others have done that for me, such as the Board of Health. Thank you, ladies. But this does relate to all those issues. Westford has just a small population of over 24,000 people. I understand that Massachusetts has one of the most restrictive and strongest gun laws surrounding gun purchases, special permits, and licenses. But knowing there could be a possibility of 4 to 5 gun shops, plus 2 sportsman clubs that are supposedly being grandfathered in, already doesn't make me feel any safer in this small town. There are over 393 million guns in circulation in the U.S. according to estimates from the Small Arms Survey. It far outnumbers the national population of 327 million people. According to data from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, there are 326 federally licensed dealers or pawn shop brokers of firearms in Massachusetts as of January 2022, or 4.7 dealers for every 100,000 people. FBI firearm background check data, which is close proxy for firearm sales, shows that in its estimated 113,472 guns were sold in Massachusetts in the first half of 2022, or 1,651 for every 100,000 people. So with all these gun dealers, all these firearms sold in just the first half of 2022, why isn't 1 gun shop enough in Westford? Plus 2 at sportsman clubs, that equals 3 firearm businesses. Still, why aren't 3 firearm businesses in the small town of Westford enough? I'm sure anyone rational can imagine if 1 gun shop sells over 1,000 gun parts in 1 year, and Westford votes in 4 to 5 gun shops, that's a lot of parts being sold in 1 year out of Westford alone. What does that mean for our schools? Our kids who have to practice Alice drills multiple times a year. We never have to do that as kids. We are a town going from 0 gun shops to multiple, and people still aren't happy. People want 5 or unlimited. Westford shouldn't be in top competition for which town has the most gun shops. Of course, some of us see this as a safety issue and a problem, especially when it'll be going from 0 gun sales in Westford to thousands in 1 year. Now we have 10 gun dealers vying for a spot in Stowe, and I can't imagine how many guns and gun parts will be sold out of Stowe. It's scary to me, even being in one of the safest states in the U.S., and look what happened in Littleton. 80 gun dealers, some under the radar. Littleton gun dealer shop sold 4,600 gun parts alone in 2022. I'm just a small part of citizens of Westford who just want to feel safe in a town that isn't being overrun by guns, gun dealers, and gun shops. We will be a town choosing gun shops over drive-thrus, cannabis shops, and adult entertainment shops. While gun ownership is protected by the Constitution, sales of guns is not a Second Amendment right. There is no infringement of anyone's constitutional rights to not allow gun shops in Westford or limit or regulate them. Guns are already easily accessible and readily available from many gun shops close by in neighboring towns, so no citizens are being denied gun purchases. Owning a gun may be your right, but running a shop business isn't. That's why you want to stop at 2, compromise at 2. It's a reasonable request. 2 gun shops is more than enough for a town of 24,000 people. Thank you.
I wasn't going to say anything until.
Go for yourself.
No, until Dennis Galvin printed.
Jeffries, if you could just put your name and address in for the record, please.
Bob Jeffries, 11 Boston Road. Dennis Galvin published in his Eyes on Westford completely false and misinformation. I never sponsored anything to ban weapons in Westford, and I think Andrea can back me up on that. I did not sponsor anything. It was the select board that put together a civil penalty for violating state law. That was all it was, a $100, $200, $300 fine, which would only have been discovered in case the police were investigating an incident. So all of that information he put in there is not only a lie, it's defamation. And what I urge you to do is do what you were elected to do, which is vote the way you think is best for the town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Crosby. I live at 14 Pierce Ave here in Westford. I've been a resident now for 3 years. I am a former gun owner, former license to carry, former license to carry concealed, and former nationally ranked marksman. I received my college tuition based on my ability to shoot at a target. Paid for all 4 years of college. I don't own a gun anymore. I moved to Westford without there being a gun shop here when we bought our house. I grew up in a town that legally kept gun shops out of the town. We moved here from a city that legally kept gun shops out of the city. I lived in Melrose, I lived in Newton. Those are two cities and towns that have the same cachet as Westford and the same reputation that we want to maintain. And like somebody said, there's a lot of white faces in this room. All right? My child, not white. Do I fear for him in this community sometimes? Absolutely. Do I worry more if there are people from outside the community walking through our town, driving through our town, getting dropped off by an Uber to pick up a gun? Absolutely. Is the police chief going to be able to stop everybody at the town line and make sure that they're a Westford resident coming in to buy a gun? No, he's not. This is something that you do need to bring to the entire community, especially parents. You want this town to grow. You want this town to have young families moving in, to contribute to the tax base, to bring their businesses, to bring their children into the school system. You want to be seen as the place to live. You want to maintain that level of New Englandness, which is no gun shops, small town. 24,000 people don't need 4 to 8 gun shops. I've lived my entire life having owned a gun up until the age of about 32. I never once felt the need to drive specifically to another town to go buy a gun. Never once did I say, oh, I am not moving to Somerville, no gun shops. That is not how I based my decision on where I was paying my rent and paying my taxes. It's not how my parents did it, it's not how my grandparents did it. This is something that you all need to consider and that you all need to bring to the entire town. I would challenge that this town is not able to legally defend that firing ranges are okay and gun shops are not. I would like for the town to explore the town laws and the city laws, bylaws that have been set by other places in this state that uphold those, that say no guns allowed. Melrose didn't have a liquor license allowed until like 2004. I mean, come on. The only place you could buy liquor was at the firing range, just so you know. And that's because the firing range, that half of the firing range was legally in Saugus. So I will say, as a parent of a child of school age in this town, the idea of another gun shop or more places for people to access weapons in this town absolutely terrifies me. I gave up my gun license. I gave up something that I loved to do, something that paid for my education, Something that was a tradition handed down from my parents, from my dad, who taught me how to shoot when I was 11 years old. I remember being so proud of passing my NRA safe gun owner class. That stopped when I started to see children getting shot in schools. When I started to see people with mental health challenges not being stopped from purchasing guns. When I started to see basically craft fairs popping up all over the country. I don't want to live in a community like this. I don't want to live somewhere that has more gun shops than it needs. Especially not one that won't have a Walmart or a drive-through, porn shop, a weed place.
You gotta wrap it up,
We
man.
gotta be very conscientious about this. When I moved here, no gun shops, no weed shops. That made this an enticing place for me to bring my child to be raised. My black child, in a very white community. Let's keep it this way. Let's make this a community that is safe for our children and for your grandchildren. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Just to be clear, this is going before the town. This is just a amendment that we're trying to discuss in public hearing and sponsor to bring to the town so it can go before a townwide vote. And the town certainly has the ability to amend it on the floor. If you've been to a town meeting, you know that happens, and people aren't happy with what we sponsored, and they can get an amendment, and if the town's agreeable on it, 2/3 majority can get voted in. So this will thankfully go before the whole town.
James Coaches, 34 Ford Village. I would ask, based on what I've heard so far from the other commenters and what I've heard about everything you guys have proposed and looked through, that we try to keep as much of this public as we can. Obviously, it's a passionate issue on both sides. I know you don't want death by committee. We've got to act fast, otherwise things can, there's loopholes that people can slip through. But I think you're going to find the majority of people don't think we need all this to open up in just a single instance here. Can we just include the previous things that are already here? They're already here. Haven't heard an incident with them. Maybe there was, maybe there weren't. But please try, if you can figure out how to change the verbiage to try to include the businesses that are here today and functioning fine into the total counts when you do the total counts. Because I think, and if we need to vote on that, then maybe that needs to wait after town meeting. I don't know. But I think you're going to find it's a contentious issue, and the majority of the families in this town are not going to want 4 additional firearm businesses in the town. Just don't need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we hold the applause, please?
Hi. Cecilia Voslin, 75 Tingsboro Road. I want to piggyback, I have a question. I want to piggyback off of a question from the Board of Health person, and I think the gentleman on the phone, Mr. Schaefer, and it regards the... Yes, I have a question about the 4 permits and where that number came from. And I understand it came from looking at all of the communities in Massachusetts. And I'm wondering how that number might change if we look at communities that are similar to ours. So if we look at communities that are not necessarily urban, or if we look at communities with similar numbers of people. So I'm just curious how that number might change if we look at not all of Massachusetts communities. Thank you.
Then I'll ask Mr. Morissette, have we done any exercise in that, or just based upon the permits allowed in the state and the number of communities?
So we only did the high-level review because we figured that Littleton would fall sort of in our same bucket, and they have the highest number. And so we didn't also look to, we didn't go through the exercise of any statistics to try to rule out any anomalies. We just took the math as it was. We thought that was a good starting point to at least come up with an initial number, which can certainly be adjusted upon direction from the board.
Thank you. Please.
Emily Teller, 9 Texas Road. I have some questions and a comment. Are there any shops that only sell ammo and don't sell anything else? I mean, is that a possibility, or is that?
Assuming it's absolutely a possibility. I don't know of any, but I'm assuming it's a possibility.
I mean, most places that sell ammo. Oh, thank you.
There are like police supply stores and everything that don't sell firearms, but they do have ammunition.
Is that only
that
for
you
the
can
police?
I would imagine that if you're not police, you can go in there and purchase ammunition if you're properly licensed.
Okay. Okay.
So
I think even in Westford, McKay Hardware used to sell ammunition. Just
Okay.
ammunition back in the day.
That's just, I didn't know, so I thought
Can't
I'd
anymore.
bring it up.
Not going.
They changed owners, though, maybe, is that why they can't do it anymore?
No, you can't, it's a licensing, you can't have it like that.
Okay. I did go to an archery place that was a range this summer, and they were selling all kinds of equipment. So I assume that sometimes ranges outside of the two that are in Westford can also sell. But again, that must be a licensing issue, correct? Okay. Thank you for answering these. I do appreciate, again, that the Board of Health is bringing up that this is that guns can be the leading cause of death for children under 18 and also early adult. And I just think that then when one of you talked about the, I can't find it in my notes, detriment to the neighborhood, I mean, that sort of seems logical. So I'll just throw that out there. As far as the 60,000 square foot that Bob brought up, it's my understanding that after Walmart, the town restricted the square footage of any retail space to, I think, around 35,000. And if it's beyond that, they would have to get a special permit. Am I correct in that?
I think the current number is 60,000 square feet, and we did ask town council to review that to make sure that that limitation that is in place for major retail is covered with the existing language, so.
Okay, it was my understanding it was less than that, but I appreciate that. And the last thing I'll say is I also recommend that the two clubs currently with ranges be included in the number of 4. Jeff, I appreciate your math. However, I would like to know at town meeting how many towns in Massachusetts have 0 licenses at this point. And I think also the average, there were many with 0, so that figures into the math too. And the aberration next door seems to be something you should have taken into consideration. But I'd like to know at town meeting how many towns have 0.
We actually, I think we have that data. I don't necessarily have it handy right now, but we have that information and we can share it.
Okay. And maybe our population equivalents and how many they have. Thank you.
Thank you.
And 51 city.
Hi. Elisa Nakashin, Holsberg, 6 Betty Lane. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Great, thank you. So, I think I spoke at one of your first meetings on this issue, and if you might remember, I asked you to please consider everyone in Westford. Consider your neighbors, because this is very complex. It's very emotional, and we gotta learn to get along, right? We've gotta figure out how to get along on this. So I think I want to offer some truth in advertising in this hearing. A lot of folks move to town because it's about the schools. Truth in advertising. We do have 2 gun clubs. It should be posted on the signs when you come to town, because that's not going to change, I don't think. There's a lot of folks that belong to these clubs and they like it. It's not going to go away. If there were a town in Massachusetts where a police officer, a sheriff, a military person, or just a law-abiding citizen wanted to raise their children, whatever their genders may be, in a safe manner, in a community where they could be supported to be safe, this has been one of those. It has been one of those. The sportsmen's clubs are always conducting activities to help the kids stay safe. I believe even Marilyn Frank called for education in the schools for gun safety, and she was shot down. It was unfortunate, and I'll tell you why it was so unfortunate. Because I told your predecessor, Chief, that I witnessed an Alice drill, and I watched teachers making life-threatening poor choices in what they were doing, because you know what? They had never been to a firing line. They had never seen what a bullet does to a watermelon. Never. What they were doing during these Alice drills was absurd to me. If they had had the experience of just visiting a firing line and watching speaking with a professional, speaking with our police, they might have made truly different choices in that moment of stress, because it would be a moment of stress, to save lives, all right? To save lives. So I just want to throw some truth out there. And so when we're talking about a business, I moved here when there was a business on Route 40. It never bothered me. I don't know of there ever being any issues, legal issues with a gunsmith on Route 40. There wasn't any problem. When I moved to Westford, for decades, there was a gun shop under the building that the bowling alley in Vinyl Square is in. That's closer to me than Littleton Road is in Westford. And that was there for decades, and children congregate there, and there was no issue, all right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is truth in advertising. I'm worried about the serious stuff. And I'm not trying to say everything isn't serious. What I'm trying to say is I want to take the advice from the professional in the room, because it's too emotional. This is too emotional. I want to see us make some progress and do something constructive here that keeps everyone safer. Whether you're pro-gun, you're anti-gun, I don't care what the issue is. Let's step forward together and do something productive. Our professional has told us what that is to do. If we try and do more and just go off the deep end, this isn't going to pass. I've got friends who are very upset about this. They're going to show up and they're going to vote against it, right? So if you want this to pass, I suggest we think about how we can move the needle forward so that we're all safer. Doesn't mean we can't all get our way all the time, right? But we can do one thing.
Wrap it up, please.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up, absolutely. The other issue is, I'm hearing a lot of stuff about we got to get rid of this, we got to stop it, we got to whatever. But I believe I heard town council speak to the fact that this is related to a pro-to-a type right? That the courts have been weighing in. If I recall, the courts have said that corporations have constitutional rights too, right? So doesn't the Constitution apply to businesses as well to some degree? And if you can't buy it, you can't own it. And so I'm concerned that if we go down this road in a heavy-handed way, this is going to be nothing but litigation.
I need to ask you now.
A lot of folks got a lot of time. I just want to wrap up
I'm
my
timing it.
comments.
You're over.
Yep. So the guns, the chief's concerns are of paramount interest to me. The other point I want to wrap up with in truth in advertising is this. I've lived in town for many decades now, and there's been one break-in after another in my neighborhood. Does anybody know that? So when I call the police and they're down in Avalon Way or whatever, what's my neighborhood gonna do? Wait? Four break-ins so far. As soon as the bank went in, my neighborhood across the street. So I just want to think about that. Neighbors are concerned. There are concerns on both sides. I'd like to think we're a bit moderate about this. I just want to make sure we're considering everybody's concerns and we're being safer at the end of the day. Please, let's get something passed that's
Thank you.
acceptable.
Thank you.
Copy, please.
Hi, Erica Cole, Francis Hill Road. I just have first, I want to thank you all for taking the initiative to do something. I think it's very important that we try to work with the, work to not have a situation like what Littleton had. So thank you, first off. I also want to observe that there have been an awful lot of comments. I think probably a lot of them land on one side or the other regarding the number of permits to be allowed in town. I am wondering about the next step and assuming that the whole point of having public comment is to have a follow-up discussion where change may be possible. With that assumption, I am wondering when that would be, given that these are separate boards that are co-sponsoring. So do you have a plan to get together in the future? I presume you're not planning to make amendments on the fly tonight. So I would presume there would be something in the future. Is there such a plan to do that? Or how does the public comment effort here, as well as all the previous ones, result in a discussion where we hear what our public officials think about the topic and whether or not there is a possible change as a result of all this discussion.
So, I don't believe we intend to close the public hearing this evening. So planning board will hold an additional public hearing on this. We haven't discussed with select board an additional joint hearing. I presume that they'll discuss among themselves what their thoughts are, if there are any recommendations of any changes, and get those suggestions on to us. But it is a public hearing. Somebody else asked that this, please keep this public. They're very public. All this stuff is on the record, on TV. You're welcome to attend the meetings. We're not closing this now. There may be some changes that the board members that we discuss, or, you know, as a board that we want to make. I don't know what those are, if there are any, but this isn't done yet.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that you have had these meetings, because I think people appreciate being able to come out and talk. I guess I'm really wondering, is there a plan to close out on possible changes and hearing what our government officials have to say before town meeting?
Well, we have to. We have to close the public hearing well before town meeting, as documents need to be prepared, and we need to get a final draft to the public.
I know we have a meeting on the 12th as a select board. That is a possibility if planning board were available to have a joint boards meeting. We can have a meeting independent of that entirely, as we did tonight with planning board meeting. So there is no date set certain, but there is the option to pick one relatively quickly, given our two board schedules.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I would ask that at some point you maybe consider having something scheduled where you all get to talk about it, just so that, you know, all these people who came out and gave their time and their thoughts, you know, maybe get to hear how it landed. Thank you.
My own perspective is tonight was to be mostly hearing from the town, hence public hearing. I think the deliberation between the two boards might be certainly a public meeting, but a different kind of discussion.
Entirely agree. I wouldn't expect that to happen tonight.
Thank you.
Al Prescott, Lakeshore Drive North. Everybody knows where I stand on this issue, but I just want to say that if all we were debating was what the police chief said he wants, 500-foot setback between the businesses and the requirement of a safety plan, I wouldn't even be here tonight. And that's the fact. I also want to make a quick comment about FFLs in other towns and this whole business about excluding clubs. We've looked at the number of FFLs that were in other towns, but nobody has bought here, when you go to include sportsmen's clubs, has asked how many sportsmen's clubs were in other towns. One of the board members commented about the poor quality of studies that he had ascertained in your packets. I'm not surprised. The RAND Corporation, a think tank that is by far not pro-gun in any way, shape, or form, looked at 27,900 studies on firearms policy, violence, etc. Of those, can you imagine how many the RAND Corporation actually found were statistically relevant enough to even begin to consider what they were saying? That number is 123. That's pathetic. And of those 123, which are the creme de la creme of all the studies, none of them were able to sit there and answer the question, what policies actually save lives? I also want to sit there and comment on some other false claims. Guns are the largest killer of children now in America. That is false. Firearms have never been the leading cause of death in the United States. If you look at the 0 to 12, infant to preteen, motor vehicle deaths of this age group are more than double than firearms-related deaths. You expand that to 0 to 14, motor vehicle deaths are 55% higher than firearms. Up to 16, it's still higher. Motor vehicles are still higher. The scales tip when you get to 15 to 19, and some studies even include children of as old as 24. That's where the scales get tipped, right at the time that they're getting involved in gang-related violence. And it also tips because in 2020, when these studies were being taken, what did we have going on? We had a pandemic where everything was shut down and nobody was driving. Surprise. I want to talk about another falsehood. We don't need shops that sell parts to AR-15s. AR-15s are illegal in Massachusetts. I saw that in a sign in one of the many meetings that I've been to. There's virtually no firearm that's illegal in Massachusetts. AR-15s are quite legal. Granted, there's an assault weapons ban. There's a discussion about what those are, but AR-15s are just a subset of those. And lastly, I've heard people say that the firearms businesses over in Littleton were involved in illegal activities. You know, the FFL folks are some of the most highly regulated people around. If you go to the ATF website, you'll see this lovely graph. 60% of all FFLs throughout the country have never even had an inquiry about how they're doing business. I find that amazing. The other folks over here, about to another 35% or so, those are clerical errors. And they're almost all resolved at some point in time. When you get down to 0.1 to 0.5%, these little slivers here, those are the people that had their licenses revoked. That's the worst of the worst.
Just to wrap
Yep.
it up, Mr. Prescott.
And as I've done before, I want to leave you with a keen observation that I made based on a comment made by the opposing side at one of the earlier meetings. I'm talking, of course, about braziers. Someone from the other side made the comment that if this goes through, there'll be more gun shops in town than there are places that sell bras. Well, guess what? I was walking through Cabela's the other day, and guess what they were having a clearance sale on? Who thought that the solution to the great brapocalypse of 2023 might actually be more gun stores?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, come on. We're going to wrap this up very quickly, so if you have anyone else who wants to get up, please.
Gloria Miller, 14 Hutchins Way. I'm glad my comments were memorable. Thank you. I had a question regarding Acton and the extension from the AG's office. Do we have a time frame for how long that would be and when we might have an answer from the AG's on the Acton bylaw?
So based on a telephone conversation today, I believe they sought a 90-day extension. Is that correct, Joe? Correct. 90 days. So that would put us, doesn't mean they would take that time, but it might not be timely for us for town meeting.
That's unfortunate. That would be a very helpful data point to have. I know you're tracking that, and thank you for tracking that, and I hope we do have that data point before, I was hoping before this public hearing would close, but certainly before town meeting, I hope we have that data point. Obviously, I think what is needed is a clear, workable standard. With regard to that, I would encourage you to have a set number in the bylaw, and then we return to town meeting if there is an application to go up over and above that. We constantly do that with alcohol licenses. If someone wants to go above our number, we go to town meeting and there's a vote. That means it's going to the voters. It's not at the discretion of a board. It doesn't put this board in the position of continuing to be in the middle of this debate. So I would encourage you to have a set number and not to have a provision that expands that just by the discretion of the board. I don't know that that creates a clear, workable standard moving forward. The other point I would make is in regard to what that number is. There are many activists who, if they were really speaking from their heart, they would be asking for 0. But I think there is a consciousness that we all agree that a bylaw that has provisions is better for our town and better for our community than no bylaw. And we respect that there are Second Amendment issues that are highly relevant and that there are very heated and distinct opinions on both sides. It just so happens that both sides of this issue seem to like the number 2. Please take that into consideration.
Point of order, one side does not like the number 2.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, we're going to take 2 more.
Good evening. Vicki Geary, 51 Carlisle Road. The funny thing is, when I came here tonight, I came here to listen.
and I've been watching and everything. I hadn't actually planned on speaking, but some of the comments, first off, I want to commend everybody on these boards because there is a cacophony of information. It is overwhelming for me. I can't imagine what it's like for you guys. And it's very confusing, as a lot of people have said. And everybody is very passionate about it. So I'm coming up here tonight just to kind of say, y'all, let's take a step back for a minute. And my southern roots are coming out, if you can miss that. I grew up in the South. I grew up near a military base. I was exposed to guns. That said, I am on the side of, less is more. I think the idea of the bylaw revisions is fantastic. I think we need that. I would strongly encourage you guys to think about, again, as a lot of people have said already, let's do what's legal, but let's, put some guidelines, put some guardrails on this. We don't need 16. I'm exaggerated, but as a lot of people, we don't need 6, 7, 8 in the size of Westford. We don't need that kind. I mean, I grew up in one of the largest military communities in North Carolina, and we didn't have that many. So I would just, like somebody said, let's put some guidelines on it. Pro-choice, pro-2A, if you want a gun and it's legal, go for it. But you don't have to go to Westford to buy it. I mean, we have restrictions on our, as somebody pointed out, our liquor licenses. We have restrictions on tobacco sales licenses. Hell, we don't have adult entertainment in this town. I want to get a tattoo, maybe. I have to go outside of Westford to get a tattoo. I can go to Westford and get my bras, though. No. Thank heavens for that. So I would just, again, thank you guys for the thoughtfulness that's going into this. And let's see if we can really come to, as many people have said, sort of a vision of this that, what was it, some of the Law and Order shows? I know I'm doing a good job when nobody's happy. Well, I think regardless of what we look like here, in general, people may not be happy. But let's just try to get to something that preserves the character of this town, too. And that was the other thing I wanted to say. I think a lot of us have come to Westford because I've lived here this is my 25th year. I'm probably considered a blow-in still by many. But there's a reason I came to this town. And that reason still exists. So I think we need to, make sure we preserve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. When is our next meeting, Jeff?
I believe it's September the 18th.
So, can I get a motion to continue this public hearing? Do I need to close out the other boards first, Jeff?
Well,
Wait, can I raise an issue? If we, and I don't know that we are because we haven't spoken, but if we are going to have a joint select board, planning board meeting to consider this discussion, and if the Board of Health wants to be involved, I don't mean to exclude you either, at our September 12th meeting, and we want all of this to be part of the public record and part of the public hearing, then I guess before you continue it to the 18th, does it make sense, even if we're not sure we're going to have it on the 12th, to continue it till the 12th? If we don't have a public hearing, then we can automatically continue it to another date when we're all free. I wouldn't want to miss the opportunity if we can all get together on the 12th.
And actually, I've been texting with Tom, who's in Japan, so thank you for being awake or whatever, Tom. But our 9/12 is pretty full, but this is priority. We'll make space for it if you want to set aside some time.
That's all.
No, I understand. So, I guess then we could continue with the potential of having a joint meeting, but if we didn't, would planning board have to go and continue again to the?
Yes, you would need to have a quorum of planning board members present, so I would respectfully ask if we can get a quorum present for the meeting of the 12th, because you would, even if there isn't actual discussion, if the hearing is continued to that date, you need to then continue it again to a future date.
I should be available.
What's the date again? 12th?
Yeah.
Jeff, question, if we went to the 12th and there was no discussion and we continued it to the 18th, is that enough lead time?
I guess it depends. What I would ask, are there any avenues you would like us to explore to facilitate a discussion, or do you not want any changes until after you discuss?
Well, that's a good question. So I mean, my thought on how this process would go is that Select Board would have the ability to discuss at their meeting any additional changes or concerns or questions that they may have, and not necessarily bring it to us at the planning board or through Jeff. I don't know that we can get a quorum. Joni says she's unavailable. I'm not available either on the 12th, senior night counseling stuff.
What would be wrong with doing our meeting on the 12th? We discuss it, and then we'll meet with them jointly on the 18th.
Well, that's fine, it's just, to the idea of public hearing.
Right, I just
So
want to
it'd be
make
your
sure
hearing.
that, I just want to make sure that we continue the public hearing to a date when it
Exactly.
actually happens,
Right.
okay? And that we don't get caught up. That was my only concern,
I would
okay?
agree with that.
Our debate could be separate from that, though, right?
But
Yes,
Jeff-
right.
Yes, but
Jeff-
it's not part of the public hearing.
But Jeff's got a warning flag going up, so go ahead, Jeff, please. Oops, sorry.
So, if I may, and council can jump in, if the select board chooses to discuss this at their meeting of the 12th, if that is not a public hearing, if the planning board is not continuing to that date, if they continue to September 18th, that is when the public hearing picks up next, and the select board discussion is outside of that hearing. They can then take whatever outcome or suggestions and bring that back into the public hearing. But I'm gonna ask council, are there any issues with a co-sponsor having discussions outside of the public hearing if all of that is ultimately brought back into the public hearing?
No, as long as it would be at your public.
Just so folks know, it's not, they're going to be hiding in private. They're going to be doing it at their meeting. It's just not where you would be involved.
Well, they could be involved. They can speak at our select board meeting, but
Okay.
their comments
It's
then.
not part of the public
It's not part of the
hearing
public
for this
hearing.
zoning board.
Correct.
That's right.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
So I'm a little confused because.
Please come up to the microphone.
Thank you, sorry. Emily Taylor, 9 Texas Road. I'm confused because it seems like some changes were suggested by the public tonight in terms of numbers and including the ranges and the clubs and stuff like that. So when will that get discussed? When will that be
Well, that's what
turned-
we're working on
That's what
now.
we're working
That's
on.
what we're talking
Right,
about.
okay, but if 2 people aren't gonna be there, so it
So,
can't be
let me
joint.
finish. So it's co-sponsor, right? And
Yep.
so the select board can discuss among themselves, and they can invite the public to discuss as well. And they can come up with any suggestions or thought that they have, and then that can be brought back to us when we'll have a discussion and a public hearing in the.
Forum.
In the forum, and people can, and we'll put together maybe A and B, or A with jointly with what we come up with, and we'll recognize what the select board has offered and thoughts that they have, thoughts that the public has had, and formulate what we would recommend as changes to the bylaw.
So it seems, I'm a little nervous to wait almost a month to the 18th and then have town meeting shortly after that when a lot of scurrying has to happen before then, and publicity and communication. So can you direct, or is it prudent for you to direct to either Jeff or town council to work on some of the suggestions that were made tonight and bring those to the co-sponsors for those meetings? Otherwise, the time is wasted if you come up with those suggestions being good at your meetings that you heard tonight.
Very frankly, I've heard maybe 1 or 2 new suggestions tonight. So it's the same suggestions that we've heard over and over. They'll limit the numbers. What I did here is additional to 750 feet as opposed to the 500. The question of the clubs has come back and forth, and the size limit of the building that's new. Other than that, these are the same talk-ups we've been talking
So
about.
the clubs.
And going to town meeting for the additional
And going to
licenses.
town, you're right, and going to town meeting with the addition, so.
But that's my list as well.
So the number of, you mean the clubs being included or not included in the 4?
Correct.
We've been talking about this for the 3 meetings, yeah.
And would they have any reason to include that draft language for your boards?
Well, that's assuming that that's what we were suggesting for them to do, right? So we haven't talked about that, we haven't discussed that as a board as yet to vote on which direction we want them to go.
Are you gonna do that tonight?
I don't believe we're gonna do that tonight.
So that's a month of not at work.
I thought I was told I couldn't speak more than so many minutes.
Good point, Deb. Thank you.
I actually have a question, Mike.
Sure.
I'm so sorry. But one thing that Diane, really made me think about was the confusion and the education that's needed. And I would completely agree with her. I think what we really have to make sure people know is we're not saying we're not going to have anything in town. And so if people go to a town meeting and or the message out there is vote no, or whatever, we're not really explaining. And so I agree 100% with Diane. There has to be way better understanding and communication about what we're trying to do here, and that I think would make a big difference to a lot of people, myself included.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have specific questions, Sue? And
No, I don't have questions. I agree with Diane that like going into this, and all the, before this, I would almost be like, I don't want a gun shop. I don't want a gun shop. And yet I'm understanding that we do have to have some type of language, and there are legal ramifications, et cetera. That's what I'm saying, that it can get, if we don't have clear communication about, we do need to make sure we get this bylaw in place. And I think that, to me, is critical. That's critical.
Agreed. Thank you.
So-
All right, we're done with, quickly, please.
Thank you, Christy Bates, 23 Pierce Avenue. I just want to point out that Sudbury is currently working on a bylaw. They're a little farther behind. One thing that they do is they have a public forum, so it's not in the hearing. And I'm just wondering if that's possible to communicate before the meeting on either the 12th or the 18th, to have an open public forum to educate, reach out to people to educate them. The other thing that Sudbury is doing is they use flash vote to reach out to the public to get survey results or information back, and it is not like surveys that we've done in the past. I don't know too much about it, but pass that information along to Jeff Morissette. That might be something that we want to put in place, so you get public opinion back before you then meet on the 12th or the 18th. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so I think the Board of Health, that we have a meeting on the 11th. We will discuss our thoughts on the
We would
bylaws and
love to
draft a
hear.
letter and share that with the select board and with
That'd be
you
great.
at that time. I will also share some information that I have that I did not share tonight, particularly relevant to the board member who was on the phone.
Great, thank you. All right, I guess before I close the public hearing, I should ask the board, our board, if there are any questions or comments, go through. Darren, do you have anything you want to add? Darren's questions?
No, some things to think about from comments. We've had it all along and some tonight, but no, nothing new right now.
My question was similar to Darren's, which is the timeline, because if we're not coming back together with the select board until potentially the 18th of September, and that's when we're going to discuss these potentially meaningful changes to the bylaw, does that give enough time for us to get that turned around in time for October town meeting?
If the sooner we were given direction, the sooner we can obviously have that vetted with council and be prepared. It is still possible at September 18th, if a resolution is reached, we can work with council then. You're not required to close the hearing that far in advance of town meeting. It has gone much closer to town meeting.
Okay.
But for something like this, I think everyone would appreciate having benefit of a written planning board report and recommendation in advance of town meeting. So the sooner we can, I think, wrap that up, I think the sooner we can do more, outreach and have conversations.
I would say too that the one issue that sort of changes the structure is this idea of having 3 different numbers.
And
most of these other ones are a word or a sentence being changed.
Yeah.
Mike?
Yes.
So following up on what you just said, Justin, I guess what I would ask, and this is not to say that we're going there, that we're adopting this change, it's really more information for all of us, is could you put together for the select board for our September 12th meeting, if we were to have that structural change, what it would look like in a bylaw, so that we have that in front of us, as well as what's being proposed.
And to share with.
And to share with the planning board, obviously.
Yeah, I mean,
so-
I can do
So
it.
that we all have that in front of us and we can compare 2 different versions and then be able to give you direction on the 18th, if we've been able to do that beforehand.
Pardon me, I don't understand what structural change you're referring to. Could you elaborate, please?
You know what, we're done with the public comments.
Well, I think that's a fair question. I think that's a fair question.
I think.
Go ahead.
Well, this was my way back, I think 2 hours ago, when I said maybe we look at having a retail store definition and a other firearms business definition, so you could have some number of one and some number of the other. That's what I think India's talking about.
Yes.
Yep, and
Thank you, that's all I wanted to know.
perfect.
I'd like to make I have a question.
Okay.
The summary that you had made. Hold on, time out. He couldn't speak, but now he's coming up to have a
All right,
summary.
what's the question about, sir?
Close the public hearing,
Well,
Jeff.
it is still a public, hey, it's still a public hearing.
My question is, you didn't bring up the thing of 2 or 4. 2 or 4, that didn't seem to be a part of
Thank you.
your-
No, we understand that there's a question about the numbers. Thank you.
Anyway, to get, that was what I was referring to, Al, and I think it would be helpful, at least for me, for one person here, if I had 2 different versions in front of me to determine, you know, where I come down on the issue, what I think is workable, what I think isn't workable, reasonable, et cetera. And that's just my one woman's opinion
Is that
tonight.
numbers and definitions?
No,
Yeah.
all I,
think
yeah, the numbers and the definitions and the structural, right.
Okay, Joni.
So, back to the structural change, because now I'm getting really confused. So, we are going to have a certain number of gun shops, a certain number of repair shops, and a certain number of existing clubs that are already there. Is that what we're talking about with this change?
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, that's what.
So the way it's defined now is there's firearm businesses is the primary definition, and then there's sort of 3 sub-definitions to that.
Right.
A retail store, a gunsmith, and a firing range. And the number, whatever the number turns out to be, is for any of those things in any combination. Another way to structure it would be to define each one differently and say the maximum special permit for each one is this, and the maximum is this, and the maximum is this.
Got it. Thank you.
You have your hand raised, sir?
Well, I was just thinking that the definition I understand is you could have a firearm business that could have all 3 or 4 of those things, and that'd be one permit.
No, I don't, is it, well, one permit through us.
One
That's the
permit
way
to
it's
us,
defined in the
but they would be, so if you had 4 of those, you could have 4 times that. And then not saying that one's a retail, one's a repair shop, and one's whatever else, or a firing range. So you could have a combination, and that's one permit, one store.
That is the way, that is the way it's drafted right now.
Right now,
yeah.
and then what I'm asking for is an alternative version, where it gets separated out.
I think
I
we
don't like
understand
that.
the
Yeah.
request.
Well, I get that, but I
Yeah,
still
yeah,
want to
okay.
see it, okay?
Hey, Bob?
Yes?
Do you have anything additional you want to add?
No, I've heard plenty.
Thank you.
Mike, one follow-up, if you don't mind. So to Jeff and council, so Acton, the AG has requested another 90 days to review their language,
I believe 90.
up to 90 days or something. But was one of the reasons that they're reviewing that language was something to do with the definition of gun store or whatever it is that
I
Acton
think it
uses?
was 2 parts, one related to language trying to prevent subleasing of the space, and the other was, I believe, providing documentation as to how they arrived at the number 2.
So the attorney, so they'd review every bylaw that gets enacted. I think what Jeff heard from them is, from Acton, is maybe that's the 2 things that the AG's office, the municipal law, he wants a little more time to look at.
Yeah, exactly, okay.
Okay. With that,
Yeah, so, can we adjourn? Let you get with the
okay, so
reading?
that you adjourn first before.
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? I don't think Tom's online, but Chris?
Aye.
Andrea?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all very much.
A motion to adjourn?
Motion, I'll make the motion. I'll second.
Thank you,
Yeah,
nice to meet you.
All in favor, Megan? Aye.
Yeah, I know, I'm the same
Michelle?
way sometimes. I
Aye.
see it.
Aye. Stephanie,
Yeah.
Folks,
I
we're not
can't-
done, so if
I
you could just
can't
hold it down for 1 minute.
hold it on my
Is your motion to continue the public hearing?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye. Bob?
To the date.
Aye.
To September 18th.
September 18th, 7 o'clock.
At Town Hall Meeting Room 201.
Yes, for now, but please check the agenda for a different venue in case we've requested. this space, but we don't know if we have this space.
Okay. All those in favor, Bob?
Town hall, Junior and 201.
Aye. Joni?
Aye.
Alan? Darren? Aye. And I say aye. Okay.
I'm gonna move that we take a 5-minute recess to
Yes.
let the room clear.
Yeah.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. 5 minutes.
I'm still here.
Attaboy.
58 minutes to sunrise.
Oh, my goodness. Poor guy.
Feels like it here, too. I'm assuming we're back on.
Back on?
All right, moving right along. Our second public hearing is PB 2311, 81 Nutting Road, Ollie Way. It's an application for approval of definitive subdivision plan continued from July 17th, 2023.
Hi, thank you. For the record, Doug Lees from Land Engineering and Environmental Services here representing Robert and Marion Butler on their application for definitive subdivision at 81 Ollie Way. It's a continued hearing. We met last month and there was a few items left to address, some DPW comments, and we've addressed those with some small changes to the plan. We've added a 2-inch hydrant detail to the plan. We were always proposing to put a 2-inch hydrant at the end of the line. We've added it to the plan. It's located right here. So we showed it on the plan to show where it works with the snow storage. And the utility pole is actually on the side by the pond. So both of those are away from the snow storage area. We've added the snow storage areas to the plan. We added the erosion control blanket back to the slope, that we reduced the area of slope that's being disturbed. But we've added the erosion control blanket. You can see it, it's this area right here, where the slopes are greater than 3 to 1, just to provide some stabilization until the vegetation grows. We corrected a elevation that was on the plan. Didn't reflect the changes made to the stormwater report. So it was just a small, I think it was a 2-inch change in the elevation of the riprap overflow. We've proposed 3/4 inch stone for the waiting area by the entrance. That little 5x6 waiting area we would put right off the entrance for the students, for the kids while they're waiting for the buses. And we removed the stop sign detail. And I believe those were the changes. We submitted a new waiver request letter. We started off requesting a waiver for the lighting, residential lighting at the end of the driveways, because I thought it was street lighting. I misread the regulation. I thought you were looking for big post lights. So we removed that waiver request and we added the lightings to the plan. But we added another waiver request at the behest of the suggestion of the DPW. And that is for the location of the catch basins. The bylaw, or the subdivision regulations read the catch basin should be close to the intersection. And we're about 60 feet back from the intersection so that we can get the water into the ponds. If we put it down close to the intersection, it'll be too low. We won't be able to get the water into the pond. And we removed the curbing previously on the left-hand side of the road so that the water can sheet flow off the road and into the wetland. And we discussed that with conservation. They have had no objections. They have a draft order of conditions to discuss on Wednesday night. So that's where we stand. I got the draft letter of approval, or the draft conditions from the board, and we read it, and it looks, there's nothing in there that's objectionable, so.
All right. Yep.
It's the Joe show, Mr. Chair.
The applicant summed it up well. Engineering has no issues at this point. And as the applicant mentioned, they've reviewed the draft decisions that are in your packet. The decisions reflect any minor changes that they requested. So.
Okay. All right, I'll go to the board. Darren?
Nope, I watched the video of the last meeting. I think snow storage is now on the plan. I don't know if it was before, but there was discussion about that, so I see where that's laid out. So if engineering is all set, I'm fine with it.
Great. Dylan?
I'm good to go. Thank you.
Johnny?
No, I'm good.
Bob?
Yes, I do have one question. It relates to the circular turnaround waivers on page 5 of 18 of the decision, and specifically the sprinkler system being provided in the new home. My questions are, how do we ensure that this sprinkler system is operational over time, and that subsequent resales of this home make it known that the sprinkler system should be operational at that time? So I have a couple questions here. One, is it possible to maybe require, or is there a mandated requirement that annual inspections be performed on that sprinkler system? And two, how do we mandate that this sprinkler system must be operational for resales?
Can I ask, can it be a deed restriction? Or something like that?
So Joe will step in if he needs to, but do we have a condition of approval about it shall be sprinklered? So if they're not in compliance with that, they're subject to enforcement already just under the terms of your decision. So it's another step.
I understand that. I guess my concern is a future homeowner. How do we make it known to that future homeowner that this is a requirement?
You could provide an explicit notice in the deed conveying that, if that hasn't happened yet. You could just provide something, notice in the deed, so that's in the chain of title, so they're aware of that condition, that it would be subject to zoning enforcement and any other actions.
I also feel the sprinkler system is going to become an amenity. When they buy the house and it has a sprinkler system, they're going to get their homeowner's insurance based on the fact that they're buying a house with the sprinkler system. And I mean, I wouldn't want to pay to put one in my house, but if my house had one, I would certainly be happy to keep it working because it'd be an amenity. It'd be a nice thing.
But is there a opposition to putting something in the deed about it?
No, that can absolutely be done, I know.
Bob, would that satisfy a deed restriction?
It would just be a notice in the deed.
Deed notice with deed, yeah.
This house has a sprinkler system as required by special permit from the planning board, or
Yeah, we were just
subdivision from the planning board.
suggesting notice be provided in the deed, not
Restriction.
a restriction. Yes. Okay.
You good with that, Bob?
I am.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Having said that, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Is there anyone from the public to speak?
Anyone from the public would like to? Come on,
Bob?
Move that we close the public hearing on PB 2311, the definitive subdivision plan permit at 81 Nutting Road, Ollie Way.
Motion and second. All those in favor say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Joni?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
And I say aye.
Thank you very much.
We're
You
not
can
done-
vote.
We're not,
Yep.
we're not done yet. Joe, again, I have to, do I do one motion that includes all three of these, or one motion each? I think I have to do one motion for each, but I don't have to call out each individual waiver, is that correct?
We typically do them separately, especially if you're only gonna have this, I guess, condition about a notice in the deed to one decision letter versus both.
Yeah.
It makes sense to do them separately. Because I imagine you want this in the definitive subdivision decision versus the stormwater management permit.
Okay. So then I will move that we approve the definitive subdivision approval for PB 2311 at 81 Nutting Road, Ollie Way, inclusive of all of the waivers called for therein, as well as our comments and as amended in our discussion this evening.
Second?
That's good.
We have a motion and second. All those in favor? Say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Joni?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
And I say aye.
Okay, I will move that we, as I get there, I will move that we approve the stormwater management permit for PB 2311, 81 Nutting Road, Ollie Way, inclusive of any waivers contained therein, although I don't think there are any, and as amended by our discussion this evening.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye.
And is that it, or is there a third one?
It's just the two, isn't it?
Just the
Stormwater-
two?
Yeah, just the two.
Great.
Awesome.
All right, thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Sorry I kept you guys here so late.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's not you.
You have to go to meetings.
All right, our next public hearing is PB 2315, 70 Boston Road. Can I get a motion to waive the reading of the public notice? All those in favor say aye. Bob?
I have to recuse myself from this item as I am in a butter through participation in my homeowners association.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye.
I will move that we open the public hearing for PB 2315, site plan review for 70 Boston Road.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye. Good evening, Mrs. Hardy.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Ellen Hardy, and I live at 39 Main Street in Westford. My husband Mike and I are negotiating to purchase the former Caldwell Banker offices on Boston Road for two reasons. One is to assure that the historic qualities of this 19th century, 1860s farmhouse will be retained. And the second is to create 5 workforce affordable apartments in the farmhouse and to work with Habitat for Humanity, who will create 2 additional units in the barn. And I believe you have a letter of support from Kevin Fusco, their executive director, giving their support to the project. We have incorporated the Drew Farmhouse, Inc. in Massachusetts as a not-for-profit for this purpose. As you know, to have a multifamily in Westford, one needs to, per our zoning bylaw, go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And if the building was built before our zoning, it is eligible for that, and we meet that criteria by about a century. So that we did in May, and the Westford Zoning Board of Appeals unanimously supported, giving us the permission for the 5 units in the farmhouse and 2 additional units in the barn. So we've done that. What that triggers with a special permit, again under our zoning bylaw, is the request for a site plan review, and that's what brings us to here this evening. The site plan review for the Drew Farmhouse is somewhat of an outlier because in truth, the site as it exists now was reviewed and approved by your board in 1994 when Caldwell Banker went to the Zoning Board of Appeals and got permission to not only have the barn be an office, but to have the entire farmhouse become realtor offices, and in addition put a 1,290 square foot building on the back of the building. And at that time, you approved parking, septic system, all of that litany of things that are in the bylaw. So in terms of what we are proposing, there are existing 28 parking spaces. We will actually be reducing that. We will be putting green space, as you can see on the right, which is now asphalt. That will become green space. We will be not changing any contours. We will not touch any stone walls. We will not change the septic system. In fact, the site plan from 1994 is very much the same, but because it's 2023, your staff advised us that we needed Land Tech to do an up-to-date one, but there are very, very few changes. And we're asking for your approval tonight of the site plan as it's presented. The few changes, and it was in the staff report from Sierra as well as in the Land Tech documentation, is we'll reduce the size of the parking. There is 1 tree we would like permission to take down. It's encroaching on the farmhouse. It's not an old tree, as in the house. Land Tech has proposed that we actually widen the driveway to the back parking from 12 to 18 feet, just so 2 cars can pass, but reduce the number of parking spaces behind. And we, through working with Sue Thomas, Sustainable Coordinator in town, and also with Matt Salem at Conservation, we will retain 5 parking spaces in the front of the building. 3 of those will be for the public to be able to park and get access to the Peace Trail and the conservation land that's abutting what we hope will soon be our land. And then 2 spaces at Sue's request will be electric vehicle charging stations, so people can get off 495, park their cars. And by the time our project is finished, the Boston Road expansion reconstruction will be done, and so the sidewalk will go all the way from the Common all the way down to 495, so people can leave their car, wander down to Panera, get a sandwich, and come back in however long that takes. So that's our request to you this evening. I'd like to ask the board to vote tonight if you possibly can. At this particular point in time, we have the unanimous support of the Zoning Board of Appeals. We have the unanimous support of the Affordable Housing Trust to convert this to workforce housing. We have the unanimous support of the Historical Commission to assure that the farmhouse will forever look like a farmhouse. We have the unanimous support of the Community Preservation Committee to go to the October 16th special town meeting for $1.45 million, and that's a lot. But the difference between Mike and I bought the Wright and Fletcher General Store 7 years, where Muffins on Main is now. It turns out we bought a workforce affordable building, but we didn't know that at the time. It had 5 apartments in it. We knew who they all were because they were our neighbors across the street, and the demand for that has been overwhelming. That's what led us to want to do the Drew Farmhouse and add as many more as we possibly could. But in this particular case, the apartments are not there yet. That entire building was gutted, the interior in 1994. Only the central staircase remains, and the rest is just modular real estate. So to turn it into 5 apartments is an expense we didn't have with Wright and Fletcher, and that's why we're partnering with the town. It would be so great to be able to go to that October 16th town meeting to say we also have unanimous planning board support for this. And I hope that the site plan review makes clear what we're trying to do, and that those few tweaks are not enough to continue this to your September meeting, and that we can confirm this evening. And I'm very willing to
I
answer.
neglected to start the meeting with the request to reduce the fee.
That's true. I saw that was on your agenda.
And, I don't know if the board wants to discuss that now, or we discuss that afterwards. Thoughts of the board on the reduction of the fee. She requested from 3,000 to 300 on this project. And let me inform the board that I did meet at the request of Mrs. Hardy and Attorney Robbins with Jeff and Joe, and explained that my personal opinion would be that I would agree to the waivers due to the nature of the project and the subject matter. Obviously, that was my opinion, not the board's opinion. But I guess maybe we talk about the fee now. Would you folks be amenable to reducing the fee from 3,000 to 300?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, so we need that in a motion, I suppose.
Move that we reduce the application fee for 70 Boston Road, PB 2315, from $3,000 down to $300.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Joni?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
And I say aye. Now, let's go to the board for comment.
Thank you for that.
Darren, you want to start? Any comment, questions, concerns?
No, I'm in favor of the project. I think it's going to look great. Any engineering comments or concerns, Joe?
No, they didn't have any real concerns, just given the reduction of payment that was talked about earlier. And now everything's going to tie in with the Boston Road project, so they didn't have any concerns with what they were seeing.
Right. Yeah, given that I'm happy with it.
Okay, great. Dylan?
I had the same question about engineering comments, and similarly, I have no questions or concerns.
Joni?
I'm thrilled with the project, obviously from the affordable housing standpoint, and we've been in full support of the project. I think it's a great project going forward, and much thanks to Ellen and Michael for doing this. I do have one question from an engineering perspective, and maybe I missed it in reviewing the plan. Was there, and I'm kind of looking at you, Joe, because maybe you would, I assume you've spoken with engineering, no ADA requirement for the second floor?
It's probably more of a building.
That's the building
item
commissioner.
versus an
Building
engineering
commissioner, okay.
item. So it'll get reviewed at the
Okay.
time of building permit.
Building permit, okay,
Yeah, we're not at that point yet, Tony. We've given the preliminary plans. MZO has presented those to Henry Fontaine, but not at that level, because until we got through tonight, it's one of the real challenges of this in the last 6 months has been what comes next and what comes first. So we will, meeting actually with our architect, Jim Segowitz, this Thursday, and we'll be fine-tuning that so that we can get it to Henry Fontaine, and then we'll have that answer.
Awesome, thank you.
Great, so the only question I have, Mrs. Hardy, I see that Health Department had some concerns, and I'm assuming they're not going to issue any building permits until they're satisfied, but
Absolutely.
have you gotten with them, and they?
I did. I responded to Ray's email and that she had her concerns. Ray was at the very original meeting, which Jeff Morissette was so gracious to put together back in March. And we've been in touch with she and Abby all through this. So really all she was doing, I think, was documenting the questions and the discussions that we've had. But of course, the Drew Farmhouse Inc. will be in compliance with all of her concerns, and many of them have already been met, and we're on the road to get those done.
Having said that, if there's nothing else, anybody from the audience? Please.
Emily Teller, 9 Texas Road. I just wanted to say I'm thrilled about this project. I think Ellen and Mike establishing a trust so that it will be affordable under market rate for workforce housing is incredibly generous and foresighted and keeps Westford the precious town that it is.
Great, thank you. All right, Mr. Morissette.
Sorry. Would the board be willing, I'm not sure if it's called out in the staff report, but I think, as Ellen mentioned, there might be a couple of details that might relate more to, say, building code issues. If you find that you have adequate information to make an informed decision tonight, would you be willing to the extent that the plan set is not 100% consistent with the site plan review standards, are you confident that you have adequate information? Are you willing to waive any of those requirements if they are inconsistent with the site plan review standards?
I would be.
Would that be the wording that Sierra had put in number 2 for the staff comments and recommendations? Jeff?
That
Is that
should hopefully be in there somewhere.
Yeah. It's just on the 3rd page of Sierra's report, should the board find that they have enough information. It would cover those few items.
And that way that wouldn't leave any loose ends.
Ambiguity, that would be fabulous. Thank you.
So if you see the comment, should the board find that they have enough information from the application submission to make an informed decision, that they may elect to waive any outstanding plan elements identified in section 9.4.4 by granting a waiver from technical requirements by section 9.4.6 of the zoning bylaw. So I suppose if we have a motion, if it's amenable, to waive the technical requirements, section 9.4.6, that would cover your concern, Jeff?
And they're not concerns, again,
Just
given
yeah.
the nature of this project, you know, big picture, it's a reduction in impervious area. They already have to address, you know, some of those access issues as part of building code. So I think big picture, she's simply looking for, are you good? Do you have what you need for your level of review? And if the case is yes, then I don't see any harm in granting that, because what if, for some reason, there is an element missed? If you, at the end of the day, you have what you need to review, then I say there's no harm in granting that waiver, if it's even needed.
All right, so why don't we have a discussion on that? Do you have any questions or concerns, Darren?
No, I mean, if it's something that needs to be satisfied before a occupancy permit goes in, then it's gonna have to be taken care of.
Of course.
I'm comfortable with that.
Right. It's like the Board of Health issue. You're not gonna sign off if there's.
Right.
Dylan?
Nope, I'm in the same boat.
Joni?
I'm fine with it.
Okay. So, I guess then, do we have a motion to waive the technical requirements under section 9.4.6?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye.
Thank you.
Motion, I probably should close the public hearing first. Motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye. Motion, should we ask staff to make a draft decision for us to?
So it's up to you. I mean, this is fairly straightforward. There's not really any new construction proper. It's more internal fit up and access there too, and removal of existing pavement area. So I leave it to the board to decide your level of comfort. You can either just have us prepare a decision, or if you want to see it again at another meeting, we can prepare a draft for you.
Some outside work must need to be done to the house.
I beg your pardon?
Some outside work, exterior work.
Actually, you know, it's in astoundingly good shape, Dylan. It really doesn't, the only thing that we will be doing will be at the moment where the barn door is, the way that DeWolf made that entrance into the barn is very contemporary glass door, and we'd like to restore that to looking more like barn door.
Okay.
But all 3 of the other doors on the front of the house are the original doors, so we will retain those. The windows are not. Those got lost in the 1994 renovation, and we won't be replacing those. But really, our goal is to just have it look exactly as it looks now, with the exception of the barn door. So there really won't be that much exterior work that needs to be done at this point in time.
Did you say you would be replacing the windows?
We will not be, we won't be able to take the windows back to the original windows. at this point in time. We'll see what the budget looks like in a year.
So the comfort of the board of having him to draft a decision for us to sign? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. We just need a motion.
And a vote.
All right, I'll move that we approve site plan for PB 2315, 70 Boston Road, as discussed this evening, with town staff to draft an actual approval for us to sign in our next meeting.
Second?
All those in favor say aye. Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye.
We can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
We'll see you at town meeting October 16th.
Best of luck.
Thank you so very much.
All right, that concludes our public hearing. We're now on to general business, review and approval of draft decision for PB 2313, 2 Depot Street. Bob, you back with us?
I'm here.
Sun up yet?
No, another half hour.
All right, so I don't see an applicant. Joe?
And Mr. Chair, the applicant did review the draft decision, obviously checked in with their client. Neither had any issues with the draft as presented in your packets.
Okay. So with that, I will go to the board. Bob, got any questions, concerns, comments on the draft decision for Depot Street?
No, I do not.
Joni?
None.
Darren? Nope. Dylan?
I am good to go.
So I'm the same, so, get a motion that we approve the draft decision for PB 2313, 2 Depot Street.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye. Moving right along, our second general business item, consider request to establish a $10,000 escrow account pertaining to PB 1935 103 Lowell Road for the purposes of addressing detention basin repairs. Mr. Hannaford.
Good evening, Jeff Hannaford, representing the applicant at 103 Lowell Road. We're at the point of getting final sign-offs and occupancy at the site. And during the inspections regarding the stormwater permit, engineering had a few items that they wanted addressed. We addressed them all. One of them was regarding there's a very small detention basin on the site. And in the original design, the detention basin was supposed to be completely drained within a 72-hour period. It was noticed by the engineering department at one of their inspections that it did contain water. So we had to wait until we had a sure 72-hour period, which was difficult over the 2 months, but we found one and it didn't drain. What we did was we had what we call a wick installed at the bottom of it. A small trench was dug, crushed stone was put in, thinking that would be the fix. Again, we had to wait for a rain event and then wait 72 hours. It drained better, but it wasn't empty. So at that point, we were all done with everything, and the way things work with the building department is they don't typically schedule a final inspection on a dwelling until they have all the other sign-offs. Since this was dragging along and the house had been finished, we thought in order to move things along, there's a buyer, a couple, they've been great so far with the waiting for the various sign-offs. We came up with the idea of, we're down to this one item. It's going to take a little bit of time to figure out the problem and fix it finally. But because everything was done, we felt maybe if we just put some money into escrow that would ensure you that it will get done and allow the final inspection for the dwelling and an occupancy to get the people in the house. In the meantime, we'll take care of this. In my letter, I do offer, besides the amount, is a 60-day time frame. It is tricky because it requires a rain event 3 days after, but you know, we feel that within 60 we can accomplish that.
So is the work done now?
No.
No. Okay. All right, Joe?
And so to Mr. Hannaford's point, so there would be, during this, you know, if the board was amenable to it within the 60-day time frame, the work would be completed in order to repair the detention basin, and then the 3 days of, you know, following rain event to ensure that it drains. That's what the $10,000 in escrow would be held for. The issue with the occupancy permit, the current people that are looking to buy, they have a rate locked in that would otherwise expire Wednesday or Thursday of this week, so then their rate would change. Interest rates being what they are, they don't want that to happen. So that's why the compromise, I guess, solution was offered, that this is the kind of last outstanding item before I can give my sign off on behalf of the board, and then the building department can go ahead and do their final inspection.
So let me ask, has engineering approved the plans for the repair? Or
They
reviewed them?
and they wanted a time frame, so that's why Mr. Hannaford offered within 60 days, this work will be completed. So they're amenable to the solution that was offered, they just wanted a time frame.
Right, okay, but they're amenable to the solution.
Correct.
Okay. All right, go to the board. Start, Darren?
Yeah, I think I'm happy with it as long as engineering is on board. That what happens if it doesn't get done in 60 days? Then
Well,
Yeah.
with any holdback escrow like that, if for whatever reason the contractor left town, you have $10,000 to hire somebody to go in, get the work done, and it's the contractor's money, it's not the town's money. But you can then take over and make sure it gets done for the homeowner.
yeah, okay. I'm satisfied with it. If engineering is happy, if engineering is satisfied with that number, I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yep, as he said, if engineering likes the number, I'm good.
Joni?
I only have one concern, and I defer to engineering, you know, what they think, but the actual piping, Jeff Brems brought up the concern about the actual strength of the piping, and its structural integrity, the piping under the driveway to the basin. Is this part of the fix, or is it only in the basin that there is the fix?
Just the basin. As far as the pipe goes, the engineering department said it's a situation where it may not meet a certain regulation, but the situation is that because of the construction of it, typically you would have a certain amount of cover over the top. In this case, it was surrounded by crushed stone when it was installed, and it's deemed a private pipe, so engineering said it's not perfect, but there's not enough wrong to say tear up the driveway and redo it. So they are saying, okay, it's basically, it exists, we've made note of it in case something happens, but we're not going to cause you to redo that and the driveway at this point, especially a brand-new driveway. Yeah.
I believe, based on Mr. Brem's recommendation, it was incorporated as part of the operation and maintenance agreement under the order of conditions.
Okay.
So if something were to happen to it, the property owner would have to go and get repaired.
Okay, then I'm fine with it.
Okay. Bob?
I'm fine, as Dylan said. If engineering is good with this, I'm good with it.
Okay. As am I. So, can I get a motion to establish an escrow account, an amount of $10,000 for PB 1935 for the repair of the catch basin, detention basin repairs within the next 60 days? Or 60 days from when the account is established, I suppose?
So moved.
Second.
Anything else needed on that, Jeff?
Sounds great.
All those in favor say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck. We get some weather cooperation.
Right.
Haven't had to wait 3 days for rain, that's for sure.
to check. Do you want that now, or do you want?
Moving right along, Mr. Morissette, can we get an update on the MBTA committees?
Happily so. So, we tried to put the two Micmac packets, I think, in your packet, which does include some of the minutes, so you can follow some of the discussion. I think they've had some really good, thoughtful, important discussions during their first two meetings. They are meeting again this Thursday evening. So I'm trying to gauge, given the hour, how much info you want. The committee has gone through, they're looking at different areas, they're entertaining requests from some other property owners. Two of the most notable are Neshoba Valley Ski Area, wishes to be included in the overlay, as does Gutierrez and Tech Park East. And there's a lot of information about kind of the leasing and utilization of those properties right now, so it certainly makes a lot of sense to at least include them in the conversation. We're bringing our consultant in to discuss, introduce Micmac to them. We'll be bringing the consultant to the planning board, of course, as well. But we are trying to vet a few issues with the committee, and we're getting ready for the September 7th strategic planning retreat. So I'm sure most of you are itching to attend that retreat, and we are, as it turns out, looking for people to volunteer as facilitators at some of the tables there at that meeting. So if you are available, it would be great to get a couple of you folks, if you're willing to. We think we need at least, we might need 15 facilitators. We have 3 to 4 consultants, 2 town staff, 3 town staff. Matt, you're not off the hook. And we've asked some of the Micmac committee, and 2 of which are here. So, yeah, hopefully if your schedules allow it, maybe you're willing to volunteer for that too.
We are intending to draft a script so everybody has the same information, same questions, so that way you're not trying to ad-lib too much.
And it's a short time window. So we're trying to solicit good, meaningful input in a short window, so it's really, you got to move people along. So if you think you can do that, then we need you.
Terrific.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right. Brings us to correspondence, reports, and updates. Oh, review of draft minutes. Right. Motion to approve the minutes of July 17th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Abstain.
Dylan?
Aye.
And I say aye. Any discussion on those minutes? Okay, very good. Correspondence reports and updates. Joe?
Nothing really, Mr. Chair. I do believe there was an invite to the board from community teamwork for a session talking about chronicle on racism in America. So that's in October through community teamwork. So if you are interested, there's registration link in the correspondence in your packet.
Terrific. Jeff?
Nothing further, sir.
All right. Seeing the end of the agenda, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Bob?
Aye.
Joni?
Aye.
Darren?
Aye.
Dylan?
Aye.
I say aye. Thank you.